And then, you know, he's just saying things like, oh, actually, well, even though Margaret Thatcher was that kind of person, you still have to hand it to her, and I think she was very good. You know, meanwhile, everyone in Britain is currently having to go to food banks, go to warm hubs, and the leader of the opposition is simply praising the person that made all that happen whilst offering no real alternative to any of those material conditions that people in Britain are suffering from.
Yeah, isn't it wild that Margaret Thatcher has like gone down in history universally in like so much media, like films, TV, comic books, like all these like, and some like really great works of art as just being this like tyrant. And then it's like there's this small portion of like, you know, people that are obviously extremely wealthy and extremely like, you know, like part of the kind of like literally the ruling elite or whatever that are still just like pretending like she's great. And I mean, it's like, I guess for them, she was, you know, it's like,
yeah, didn't fuck up their lives. I mean, it would be even worse actually if what Keir Starmer says about his childhood is true, and he grew up on a council estate, and he somehow found himself growing up to love Margaret Thatcher. I think every single person who grew up on that council estate with him would probably tar and feather him.
yeah. That's the same down here. I mean, it's like we've had similar things. Like we had a budget, like one historic budget that like we are still dealing with, you know, decades and decades of inequality from it. It was called the Ruthanasia kind of years. Well, there was like a couple of things like Ruthanasia and Rogernomics, stuff like that. And so we've had some of our biggest like conservative politicians have talked about growing up under those policies, growing up in state homes and stuff. And then like as soon as they get in power, they're just like, okay, cool. And we need less state homes. We need less funding. We need like, you know, all this kind of shit. It's like, it's, yeah, deranged. Like what happened to you, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, welcome to Red Planet on that note.
Here we go. Doing? It's happening.
It's happening. It's all happening. Everything is happening all at once at the moment.
Tim, yeah, let's start it off.
Let's.
I think today is going to be a really good day. I can already tell.
Oh, it's going to be great. Listen, Tim, what's the most base thing you did this week?
Most base thing I did this week is I did a poster for a Gaza fundraiser that's coming up. It's like a film night. It's actually it's in a town, a small town in New Zealand, so it's not like a huge thing or whatever, but it's like some friends of mine that run an independent press, and they're just trying to, you know, do what they can in their communities to raise money and awareness for what's happening in Gaza. So they're putting together a film night playing like independent movies by Palestinian filmmakers and stuff. And so I put together a little poster for that event. It's like just like an entry by donation kind of thing. But we are also talking about maybe doing like selling like tote bags, or maybe even just like a nicer print version of the poster or something like that to raise some additional money. I don't know if I can show it yet, but it's just a real simple kind of films for Gaza thing with like an olive branch and stuff like that. I'll probably
nice
link to it on Twitter when it gets posted.
So make sure to stay until the very end so that you can hear Tim talk about where you can find him on Twitter. We're not going to tell you until then.
All the Tim heads are definitely sticking around. I know that for sure.
Yeah. What about you, Kira? What have you been up to this week?
Ooh, I've been up to a lot. Going to protests now every weekend at least for Palestine. So I'm very happy to get out there and be able to scream amongst other people that are also screaming and doing something. I've been continuing a lot of my reporting, if you want to use that word. It feels weird to use that because I'm just a bimbo on the internet, but reporting for what is from the Palestinian side of what's going on. Not just the Palestinian side, but like the Arab side, not even just the Arab side, like we're seeing a lot more unification and solidarity, not enough solidarity by any means, but still solidarity nonetheless, from other entities other than just Palestine, for the Palestinian people. And so I've been trying my best to tap into those primary sources as soon as they communicate what they communicate, and be able to disseminate that information. So that's been, also trying to debunk the Zionist lies that are just constantly rapid firing, which is exhausting and very frustrating because it sucks up way too much time. And I think that's kind of part of the point. But unfortunately, you have to try to debunk those. And also, I don't know, just generally, I'm really happy to see how my Discord server is like growing, because there's a lot of like cool anti-Zionists that I've met on Blue Sky, the alternative to Twitter, that are now like joining up in my Blue Sky or in my Discord server. And like, we're having a lot of really, really productive conversations. Like, there's like anti-Zionist Jews, there's Palestinians, there's so many different voices that are, it's really, really cool to have these like, these conversations that are coming from multiple perspectives, but also sharing the same ideology. And so it's been really, really great. So I've been really enjoying that. And if you want to join my Discord server, you want to be part of that conversation, please feel free to. Anyways, now what about you, Mule?
It's me.
What about you, my little peanut?
It's me, Kira. We're friends. You know this.
We are friends. It's true.
Try and be friends with all of my co-hosts on Red Planet, Tim and Sophie as well. But, me and Kira, we have a friendship, and it's important to mention. But what I've been doing this week, if you caught the show last week, I was telling you about our AGM at the Tenants Union. We had lots and lots of people who showed interest in doing activism for the housing struggle, which was really, really cool. I trained a bunch of them last week, and came into like the second stage of training this week with a lot of them. Not all of them. Two of them had to sort of like bow out just because of like, holiday stuff or family kind of things, which is absolutely understandable this time of year. So, and it would be understandable anyway. One of the first things that that I taught them was to be real about their own capacity and stuff. So that was good that they paid attention to that. And on top of that, the second stage of learning is basically where like I bring the new MSOs, member solidarity officers, I bring them into not a Discord call, a Zoom call. God, could you imagine if we used Discord in actual real life organizing? Everyone would be like, what is that, bro? But yeah, we basically have a Zoom meeting with a member, like, it can be not a member. It depends on the severity. Like I was talking about prioritizing last week, and that's the thing that we talk about. So it might be like someone who's got an eviction coming up. If they're not a member, we'll of course help them. If someone has like extremely bad mold and damp to the point where it's like damaging their health, of course we help them. And so basically, we have a little Zoom call where we agitate the member or non-member. We basically say, wow, that sounds really shit, and it sounds like that is a direct product of the class position of landlords. We don't always word it like that, but you have to basically try and make people aware of their class consciousness in a way. I'm going to actually be talking about that in this episode, surprisingly so. I won't go too much into that. But I've also been doing with the Tenants Union something that I've spoken about literally a year ago. Red Planeteers of old will remember me talking about this, where I was trying to spearhead the LGBTQIA plus statement, like the pro-queer statement on the Tenants Union website. Not had enough time to deal with that. Not had enough other queer people in the union to do it with me, so I felt a bit wrong doing it myself. Like, I think I've always wanted this to be like trans-led, because trans people are, of course, the most vulnerable of queer people at the minute. Do you know what I mean? Specifically, like if it was a trans woman of color, obviously, like be preferable, but we don't know any as of yet in the union. So obviously, like, that's also something we need to work on. But the good news about it is that we finally organized a meeting, and my kind of share in that was like going to this space, which is a queer lit cafe, where you can buy a bunch of queer books, and that's really exciting. Lots of really, really good books in that shop, actually. But they do queer events for free. So we just said to them, look, we're a bunch of queer tenants. We need to organize. We need to have our first meeting. Are we able to come in? And they were like, yeah, that's fine. You can do that for free. And then on top of that, they also do little bits and bobs of food. They'll do some nice tea for us, various different, snacks and what have you. So that is very exciting. I'm very excited to get that started, basically. But that's all of us. And I want to talk about the very meaning of this show. The very reason that we got this show started is to get you little listeners out there, little chatters, little listeners, whatever you're doing, however you're absorbing the content, to get out there and do some stuff yourself. And we've got this week a based viewer called Robin, who helped block the entrance to a Boeing headquarters, turning away employees and deliveries. I believe that's regarding some pro-Palestinian action that was going down.
I bet you anything it is. It has to be.
And then also, they helped shut down a turf event at the local library. Super base. Love that shit. Let's fucking go. And then also helped shout down representatives at the American Party of Labor who tried to take charge and credit for protest action they did not organize. Their anti-sex worker, pro-banning of drugs, proponents of police reform. Yeah, fantastic work. Absolutely incredible, Robin. Thanks so much for telling us. Wish you the best in the future and solidarity. We want to know what base things you've been doing, dear listener. You can message us on Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok, or send an email to based@redplanetshow.com. That's based@redplanetshow.com. Include your name and pronouns if you're cool with that. We may shout it out in a later episode. But that's the base section done, and now we got some amazing news that Tim wants to break to everybody. What is it, Tim? What's happened this week?
Well, probably in the most positive news from our little news section this week. Congratulations to elder statesman Henry Kissinger on being dead and ridding the world of his omnicidal, chauvinistic, imperialist evil. Thanks to Soph for writing these stories. Red Planet would like to officially thank and congratulate Henry Kissinger on having died and no longer being alive anymore. Our thoughts are, of course, with the family of each and every of the countless dead at Kissinger's hands across Cambodia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Laos, Bangladesh, East Timor, Chile, India, Pakistan, Egypt, Syria, Cyprus, Argentina, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Iraq, and the Western Sahara. The world is unequivocally a better place for no longer containing Kissinger, who at 100 continued to work to further American imperialism and the eternal genocide of the poor by the ruling class. Kissinger was alerted to the impacts of his policies using the word genocide at least twice on record and had countless opportunities to understand his role in history as one of its greatest monsters. He was a tumor on the spirit of basic human decency. We here at Red Planet only hope that his final thoughts on Earth were scared, ashamed, and painful. And an extra note from the Palestinian resistance. Little red triangle here, if you know what that means. Henry Kissinger, former US Secretary of State and architect of the Camp David Accords, which laid the foundations for Arab Zionist normalization, has died at the age of 100 with the blood of millions on his hands. Yes,
I want to contrast that statement from the Palestinian resistance to the statement by the ADL, because I do not think at this point that Israel has not that I've seen has actually issued a formal statement on Kissinger. I'm not positive, but we do have the ADL, which is basically Israel, that basically exalted him and talked about how he was such an incredible, the first Jewish American secretary of or something. They're basically lauding him as like this incredible Jewish man
which is like wild because he's so anti-Semitic and was like such
he's
a
extremely anti-Semitic, but also
as a Jewish dude he was like very
right. No, he absolutely is. Like he said that if any people that have been persecuted for 2,000 years must have been doing something wrong. Like he said if he wasn't born a Jew, he would be an anti-Semite. Which, by the way, sorry Kissinger, but you were.
Yeah.
He's dead. It's so
dead.
funny he died.
Yeah.
He did die. He's gone.
Yeah.
But also we enjoyed, or at least I witnessed, a fresh wave of Zionists on social media accusing people of being anti-Semites for trashing Kissinger, saying it's a little sus that you're this happy about the death of a Jewish man. So just to make it extremely clear, the moral caliber of who we're dealing with. Yeah,
it's wild. Seeing in real time the kind of like the relitigation of history and the rehabilitation of these people. I did see people saying things like we should at least be like respectful of the dead and all this kind of stuff like that. And it's just like, man, like, what about having some respect for the millions of living people who, were the victim of all of his crimes? It's like there's like the direct kind of the direct victims, like the people that literally died at the hands of the American foreign policy that he pushed. And then there's like the rest of the world that felt like the kind of ripples, like the ramifications of this policy and this kind of like, all this thing. Like, I think it's like, if we were really to look at the scope of the true nature of his crimes or whatever like that, it would be a much, much bigger thing, because it's like, you can't really put a number on that, right?
Yeah. Go and watch Luna Oi's video on Cambodia and like, just like everything in there, like she doesn't directly, she does talk about like how US imperialism like led to it like in depth, to be honest. But like if you just watch like the first bits of it and you see this like black and white photo of Kissinger with Pol Pot, who, if you don't know Pol Pot, if you don't know about the Khmer Rouge and all that, like they basically like exterminated 2 million Cambodian and Vietnamese people over the course of, I don't know, 3 years or something. Kissinger was integral to that happening as sort of like a buffer against communist Vietnam, communist China, and communist USSR. So,
and it's like the classic thing, right? America kind of propping up these small forces that then go on to do terrible things, and that's like the core of American foreign policy, right? Like propping up groups to fight wars for them and to destabilize their enemies.
We love that shit.
He was the architect of that.
Speaking of Cambodia, and talking about the ripples of Kissinger, like to this day, because of like the remnants of that war, there's so many like intact explosive devices there that people are still getting constantly like losing limbs to this day. Like there's like, I think there's like 40,000 amputees living right now in Cambodia because of Kissinger, because of him. So I'm not going to be respectful. Whenever people insist this respect, I always think, if I were in the same room as somebody who is the absolute victim of this man, I would never shame them for shitting right on his grave. And so I'm going to stand by them and shit with them.
Yeah.
There was a guy, what was his name? He was another chef, and he was a friend of Anthony Bourdain's, and he wrote him a letter once saying, he was like, man, I was in this restaurant and it was like this really, like it was like this really prestigious thing, like, there's only limited seats or whatever like that. And he's like, I was there at the same time as Kissinger, and I wanted to just like go over and like dump some wine on him and like say something. He's like, but I just couldn't do it, because of, like whatever. And, Anthony Bourdain, who obviously had like a very like flawed, I think, perception of or understanding of imperialism and stuff, but still was very good on, stuff like this.
Yeah.
It's just basically just, I think you just called him a pussy or something like that. He's like, dude, like, what are you doing? Like, and it's like this wild thing where it's like, you're supposed to be so civil with these people because of like the position that they have or whatever like that, where it's like, man, if you went to McDonald's and you saw some guy at McDonald's that had like, killed a family member or something like that, you'd have no qualms about just going up and slapping them or whatever like that.
Yeah.
But because it's like a fancy restaurant and this guy's like a millionaire and has a fancy job or whatever, he's just insulated from the effects of his crimes. Like, these people should be unsafe.
I remember when one of the killers of George Floyd, it wasn't Chauvin, but one of the killers of George Floyd, somebody found him in like a Walmart or something, and they were taking a video of him and harassing them. Yeah. And all these people on social media are like, this is not okay.
Yeah.
You should make sure that every single moment of this fucking miserable asswipe's life is full of harassment. You should make sure he cannot get another second of peace. Because you know this system is never going to truly hold them to account, ever.
It's like there was that video of Alex Jones getting harassed at like the little the chicken place in Texas or whatever like that, and everyone just kind of realized who he was and just being like, get out of here or whatever. And people got all precious about that as well. And it's like, this is the guy that has like goaded like so many people into stalking like victims of like mass shooting and like, you know, having like dead children and stuff like that. Like, why does he think he should be safe from, you know, this or whatever? Like, anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. But anyway, we should maybe we should talk about some more news. Mule,
yes.
What's going on in Russia at the moment?
Well, we are ever so slightly acutely aware of queerphobia around the globe here on Red Planet, and this is some bad news. Unfortunately, this is more and more anti-queer stuff from Russia. Russian courts this week have banned any LGBT movement, calling it extremist. So, you know, and again, you know, I want to just sort of, before I go forward with this, talk about why marginalization sounds so similar all the time. You know what I mean? Like, we're seeing in imperial core countries, people calling pro-Palestinian movements extremist, right? And this is just the exact same thing. It's recuperation, it's double speak, it's double think. So here's the story. Russia's Supreme Court has ruled that LGBTQ activists should be designated as extremists in a move that representatives of gay and transgender people fear will lead to arrests and prosecutions. The court ruled on Thursday that the international LGBT public movement and its subdivisions were extremist and issued a ban on its activities on the territory of Russia. The hearing took place behind closed doors and without any defense present. Russian media reported it ahead of the verdict. Reporters were allowed in to hear the decision. Amnesty International called the ruling shameful and absurd, warning in a statement that it might result in a blanket ban on LGBTQ organizations and violate freedom of association, expression, and peaceful assembly, and lead to discrimination. Moscow's crackdown against liberal-leaning groups has intensified since Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year, which has seen the LGBTQ community in the country face increasing curtailment of their rights. One thing that, like, you know, jumps to mind is just like this story about this guy who was like a 37, year old guy who like grew up in you know, sort of like very rural place in Russia. Lives in Moscow, but, you know, it feels more comfortable there, but he's just like unable to be openly queer still. So it's like this weird sort of scenario where it's like, all right, I'm in Moscow, so maybe I can go in like an anonymous Grindr account and maybe not get killed and meet some guys or whatever, but also like can't openly be gay. Like, you know, at this time of this story about this guy, you know, there were bills being put forward basically saying that, like, you know, information that denies family values and propaganda of non-traditional sexual relations should be banned. So, you know, everybody knows what that is. So it's just like more and more encroachments on queer people's, you know, freedoms. And that's just been growing as this story says. The Kremlin has ramped up since its rhetoric about protecting traditional values, again, just like I said, from what it called the West's degrading influence. Now, let me just take a little divergence again here from the notes on this story. But if we're talking about the West's degrading influence, this can directly be, and I'm not saying that Putin thinks this. I know that Putin is just a vile homophobic piece of shit, and I know that people in the Kremlin are as well. I'm not saying that this is the case, but the reason why this consent is so easily manufactured is because who's the army that always says that they're fighting for queer rights? Well, that would be the Imperial Cause Army. They're always bombing Gaza for, you know, queer rights, you know, opening up a fucking pride flag on the, you know, destroyed home and obvious tomb of like thousands of people. Just absolutely vile shit. It's much easier to persuade a populace of majority heterosexual cisgender people that queers are a form of Western imperialism, you know, destroying the family values, et cetera, traditional values, you know, when those armies make a sort of show about being like, oh, you know, you don't get to like have transgender healthcare in any of these states, but you could definitely join the military, you know, fly the trans flag when you're bombing up a bunch of brown people, you know, like that's the kind of shit that you just like see them talk about, you know, and it's just fucking vile. Anyway, going back to the story, last November, lawmakers also approved a bill banning all forms of LGBTQ propaganda, a move with far-reaching consequences for a book publishing and film distribution. That is literally what Section 28 was in the UK. Lawmaker Peter Tolstoy said that at the time, the measure was about erecting a barrier to the penetration of Western anti-family ideology. Yes, because we're also anti-family, aren't we? In the USA and the UK, they definitely let queer people have all the rights in these countries. Since the ruling, Russian security forces have raided numerous gay clubs and bars across Moscow. Police officers searched venues across the Russian capital late on Friday, including a nightclub, a male sauna, and a bar that hosted LGBTQ parties under the pretext of a drug raid, according to local media. Witnesses told journalists that club-goers' documents were checked and photographed by the security services. They also said that managers had been able to warn patrons before police arrived. Activists have said the broad and vague definition by the top court means that authorities could potentially crack down on any individuals or groups who are deemed to be part of the movement. The ruling could therefore signal an effective ban on all organized activity in favor of LGBTQ rights. So, extremely awful, extremely fucked. Solidarity with all the queer people in Russia and any country that is, you know, suffering from, you know, sort of like imperialist propaganda being shoved down the throats and having that be manufactured in a way to, you know, make queer people's lives awful. But speaking of literally all that, Kira, give us the Palestine update.
Yes. Okay. So it's been a week. Lots has happened. I will say just right now, there's no possible way, just like this goes for every single week. There's no possible way I can cover everything very quickly, but I will try my best to give you a rundown of a lot of what's going on. But please know that there's so much more to be said. So the ceasefire, quote unquote, has officially ended. So note that Israel has violated this ceasefire a number of times, including terrorizing Palestinians, trying to supply hospitals, trying to reach the wounded, trying to return to their homes, etc., killing at least 3 people, but we're still aggregating all of the ceasefire violations and trying to figure out exactly how many people were in fact injured. But it should be noted that Israel has not complied with this ceasefire and has done so many times that I've actually lost count and just was like, okay. So this is a truce between Israel and Hamas began on November 24th and is renewed twice before its ending on Friday. Under the truce, fighting was paused and humanitarian aid was allowed to enter Gaza as Hamas released captives in exchange for Israel releasing Palestinian prisoners. Also captives, for the record. This is not a legitimate occupation. No occupation is legitimate, but Israel's is not legitimate. Their prisons are not legitimate. And women and children are being kept there illegitimately, for the record. It should also be noted that the humanitarian aid that was supposed to be allowed in, I think, was like 200 trucks a day. And Israel really prevented that with both their violence, like from snipers, etc., but also through just straight up blocking certain routes. And so there was like a day where only like 20 trucks was able to come through. And should be said, 200 trucks a day is still not even remotely sufficient for a population as large as Gaza's. So nearly 240 captives were taken by Hamas following the attack on October 7th. Of them, 127 captives remain in Gaza. 110 are freed as part of the truce. Of the 350 Palestinians imprisoned, the women and children, Israel has permitted to be released. 240 have been released and 110 remain. However, at the same time, Israel has arrested more than the number of Palestinians from the West Bank and East Jerusalem. So it should be noted that Israel is still trying to inflict these like horrific like harms on Palestinian people as a whole. This collective punishment keeps continuing. There's also video emerging of the the Israeli hostages being released by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. And these hostages look very happy. They're hugging Hamas. They're high-fiving them. They're cracking jokes. And this coupled with testimony from some of the hostages that were able to speak to the media before Israel got to them, including one woman who wrote a really lovely letter to Hamas thanking Hamas for treating her daughter so well, because it made her daughter felt like she was the queen of Gaza. Comparing this to the testimony we're receiving from the children and women being released from the Israeli prisons, in which they were fed uncooked rice, had to sleep straight on the floor, maybe with one sheet, maybe not, the huddle up together, weren't allowed showers, cracked open, like being beaten and sexually assaulted by IOF, and sometimes beaten with pipes so hard that the metal pipes bent. And these are children, and some just dying on the ground. Just awful conditions. So we're seeing a completely asymmetrical treatment of captives from these two entities. But also, I want you all to know that Israel is now, because of that bad press, they're now clamping down on Israeli hostages' testimonies, and they are specifically monitoring what they say and coaching them. And so I would be extremely, extremely skeptical of any Israeli reports, just to be clear.
You're saying we should be skeptical of Israeli propaganda. I
am saying that.
Wow.
I also want to say that there's this one woman, I forget her name exactly. Oh, it kills me that I forget her name. But she's an Israeli. She was held hostage by Hamas. She's an Israeli. And she was seen being very kind to the Hamas terrorists and when she was being released. And Netanyahu wanted to meet with her, and she said no, because like all of those blood is on your hands. And so I'm very interested to see if because of the nature of what the internet is, right? It's not as easy for the state to censor people. I'm really interested to see if she or other hostages are going to be able to make their stories known to the public.
Yeah, it is interesting, right? They like totally just clamped down on them. They're like, and it is, over time it's going to be interesting. But even just like this footage of them coming out and shaking hands and saying, to people like, thank you, like using Jewish terms of endearment to thank, these people that had, held them hostage. It's like, I don't think that you can really come back from that. Like, I've seen people try to take like screenshots and then say like, this is evidence that they were pressured to do this or say this. And it's like, fair enough, you could say like, okay, they might feel compelled to say, to be positive, especially if they have friends or family there. But it's like, man, like these hostages that are coming out are better actors than the actual actors that Israel has to used to create. It's like, okay, I mean, they're a lot better than Gal Gadot. Like it's it's like there is like a sincerity that you see in them, and I wouldn't be surprised if during their time, and like it still was like captivity, but like if they had taken them around and they had been like, this is what life is like for us. You hear the bombs coming down, you see this is what it's like for us. We just want to, we want to live in peace. Taking them for a tour around the place, like, showing them what it's like. And I think living firsthand, especially seeing some of them, like, there was like the one girl that had extensive medical treatment. I think it was on her leg, and that she, they sent her back with like the full pins and everything in her leg and stuff, which is like the best standard of medical care that they could provide, not just under bombardment, but under years and years of blockade as well and stuff like that. Like it would be hard to imagine like coming out of that and being like, oh no, these people just, like they just want freedom, like it would be hard to go through all that. Seeing, I mean, there's videos of October 7th of Palestinian resistance fighters coming on, groups of festival goers and just being like, just get out of here, like while the, Israeli Defense Force are firing on them and stuff. It would be so hard to be those people and then be like, wait a minute, these people aren't animals. These people aren't like, what they call them, like these like savage barbarians or whatever like that. Something else is going on here,
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like once you start pulling that thread,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the same for the way that governments disseminate propaganda about, like over here about Maori, the things that the government has said in the past, things that, the Australian state has said about Indigenous people there and stuff. And then it's like people actually kind of start engaging with these communities and go like, oh, wow, like actually they're just people, like, they're three-dimensional people that have comprehensive wants, needs, dreams,
and they're
all
rational.
these kind of things as well.
They like painting Palestinian people as these like you said, these barbarians, these savages that just grunt in a direction and have no rational thought. They just do evil. And actually realizing that the actions of Palestinians are very rational. Actually, like there's reason for these, as much as if you don't agree with them. And this goes for like the actual actions, not just what Israel claims that happened because some anonymous person claims they saw from a distance, like whatever. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's just actually connecting with the people as human beings. And just because I know there's still a lot more for you to go through, I'm going to finish up the discussion of the hostages just with this. It is interesting that the verified treatment of the Israeli hostages that I can confidently say this is probably true, that the Israeli media is trying to paint as this like evidence of horrible torture is like they lost weight and they're tired. And maybe some of them haven't had the adequate medicine. And this is just merely a reflection of what it's like living in Gaza. You're saying that living in Gaza is torture. That's what you're saying. You're saying that if you live in Gaza, you are subjected to horrible, like you are subjected to a scarcity of basic resources that human beings should be allotted as a human right. And so I just find that incredible that they're trying to put this on Hamas as like Hamas has inflicted this when they have not. They just have not done this.
I think as well we should also like, I mean, you all know this, Kira, like this isn't like, anything on this particular story, but it's like people are so like ready to be like Hamas. But again, like, just going back to like the origin, well, not even the origin, sorry, like the most recent thing that everybody talks about, October 7th, like it was a variety of different organizations. It was the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. It was like all these other different Palestinian resistance organizations as well. So of course, they're only talking about hostages that Hamas had, because then it's easier for them to manufacture that consent that like they had these terrible conditions. Oh my God, they don't care about human rights.
Yeah, because Hamas right now is working with the PFLP. It's working with Islamic Jihad. It's working with a lot of different groups. And so, yeah, no, it's not just Hamas taking them. Hamas has become like it's frustrating because Hamas isn't even taking them. It's Al-Qassam Brigades that is taking them.
Al-Qassam Brigades, yes.
So like, it's not even Hamas. It's not the government that runs the sanitation systems that's taking people hostage. It's the militant wing of Hamas. So, yeah. Or like in concert with like the PIJ, etc. Anyways, so I just also want to, since we have a lot to go through, so let me try to get through this. Note that the West Bank violence during this entire quote-unquote ceasefire has never actually ended. Settlers and IOF soldiers, and I want to make it very clear, settlers is a huge part of the violence that is occurring in the West Bank. The civilians, the innocent civilians in the West Bank are a big, big part of the horrors that are occurring to Palestinians. They are terrorizing and killing Palestinians. Palestinians throughout the West Bank have to guard their homes. At night, they're being terrorized. They're being murdered in their homes. The IOF during the day and especially at night, they love doing this shit at night, is raising Palestinian infrastructure using Caterpillar equipment. They're doing this systematically. This is a form of genocide and collective punishment, which is a war crime. And the IOF is committing a massive abduction campaigns to offset their quote unquote losses with all the Palestinian prisoners they've had to give back as a result of the Palestinian resistance taking Israelis captive. Also, 2 days ago, the IOF published a map dividing Gaza into 2,300 segments as part of a displacement plan in a new phase of its genocide. Gazans are being asked to provide their block number so that they can be directed to new blocks. Israel is sending leaflets to direct people to new areas. This is occurring in light of the U.S. pressure for a more focused genocide. This comes after the IOF for the first time asked residents in southern Gaza to evacuate last week, areas they deemed prior to be safe. Over 40% of martyrs, aka Palestinians that have been killed by Israel, over 40% of martyrs have ascended in South Gaza. Many of these people are displaced from the north, so it's not even remotely safe. I just want to make it clear. All of this is just smoke and all, it's just them trying to play, I'm a good guy because I did what I could, while I continue to kill Palestinians at the same rate. Just to be clear. And also, it's a terrifying, like looking at a map of this is disgusting. This is disgusting. Like, if you're not watching right now, it's the Gaza Strip, but it's chopped up into so many little segments that the segments are now overlapping each other, and it's indecipherable. And this is and imagine trying to follow these instructions in the middle of active genocide, with bombs flying everywhere, with people trying to dig up children out of the rubble. You're maybe even lost a limb, like you're looking for your mom. There's children just wandering because their parents are killed. Like this is inhumane. This is disgusting. I should also say that they are now targeting journalists. Well, they have been targeting journalists, but they're targeting journalists still, including a lot of people may know this name, Motaz. I know him as Motaz on Twitter, on Instagram, who is an incredibly well-known photographer. And he just hours ago was saying that he is now surrounded by tanks. And so now he's trying to flee Gaza. And I saw him at the Rafah border, which is the southern border dividing Gaza and Egypt. But he's also trying to continue to report, because the reason we love him is because he is such an incredible eye into what is occurring in Palestine. So I hope he lives. We all hope he lives. But it also is still a tragedy that he is now unable to report to us what is occurring, because so much of our insight into what's going on in Palestine is through him. So I just hope he's okay. Also, Israel is now killed as well. They're also bombing hospitals. They've already killed a top scientist. So this is them target, and Israel always likes to claim how surgical their attacks are and how very specific and controlled they are. So given that, and also given everything we know about Israel, these are targeted attacks, to be clear. President Lula of Brazil, friend of the stream, he said, "What is going on in the Gaza Strip is not a traditional war of those we see on films that we learn and read about. What we see is genocide going on, killing thousands and thousands of children that has nothing to do with that, women that have nothing to do with that, and destroying the things that took years to be built." More leaders should be saying things like this. So thank you, Lula, for speaking the truth. It's a damn shame that so many cowards run this world. Not Lula, though. I'm very, very happy to hear that from Lula. A pro-Palestine protesters self-immolate, set themselves on fire at Atlanta Israeli consulates. Israel's comments: "It's tragic to see the hate and incitement toward Israel expressed in such a horrific way. Forever the victim is Israel." Britain announces that it's conducting aerial reconnaissance flights. This is, I think, as of this morning. Aerial reconnaissance flights over Gaza, showing new proof of its participation and involvement in the genocide. Their claim is that their aerial presence will not have a combat role, and that their aim is to, quote, locate hostages. And I personally find, and as well as the Palestinian resistance finds, that this excuse is disgusting and worse than the offense. This is ridiculous. I think we all know what's going on here. Britain is not an idle a neutral observer, nor can one be a neutral observer to genocide. The U.S. House, sorry we're going through these rapid fire, but appreciate everyone sticking with me. The U.S. House voted a few days ago on a resolution to affirm Israel's right to exist, as well as condemning Hamas and other very related expected bullshit. Only one congressional member voted nay. Only one. Representative Thomas Massey, a Republican. The squad voted yay across the board with two exceptions. Rashida Tlaib, a Palestinian American, she voted present. And Cori Bush voted not voting. So vote blue, y'all. Yemen and Iraq have announced prior to the ceasefire ending that they intend to escalate if Israel continues. And Yemen followed through this morning by attacking several Zionist ships in the Red Sea. I also want to point out that Iraq has said that it's already been bombarding the American occupation bases that are still in Iraq, because if you didn't know, America still is occupying Iraq. So, which is bullshit. Just a reminder, that's still happening. And Iraqi resistance is very, very, very aggressive in making it clear that this is an American-run Zionist occupation, which we also agree with. But Iraq has said that or at least the Islamic resistance has said that if the aggressions in Gaza continue, that it will in fact expand its assault on America outside of Iraq, potentially. So we might see things escalate a bit. Something that I found to be very heartwarming is the Yemeni military. I think it was like one of the top guys. He tweeted one word from his Twitter, and it just said Zim. Now, Zim is a shipping corp. It's the largest Zionist shipping corporation. And this Zionist shipping corporation, I believe, comes from China and ships things through the Red Sea up. And if you didn't know, Yemeni militaries have been taking a lot of Zionist ships hostage. They've been just capturing them or destroying them. And so now from that one word tweets, Zim is now not going through the Red Sea, but going all the way around Africa. All the way around Africa, which is tremendously longer and takes way more time, way more money. So that's a win. But I would also love to see more countries, be a little upset with these Zionist ships coming through. So that would be great. Anyways, that's your very, very, very fast rundown what's happening in Palestine. There's a lot of stuff I missed out on, but I hope I hit some of the main points and free Palestine. Tim.
Cool. Yeah, one more news thing. This is just recent news for down here in my neck of the woods. So we recently had an election down here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And unfortunately, we had probably one of the worst possible outcomes. We've got a coalition government with three of the shittier more mainstream parties. So National are the main kind of like center-right party that have been back and forth with our Labour Party for decades and decades, whatever. Then ACT, which is just like the sellout libertarian party that are like, they're not actually libertarian, they're actually like classic kind of Tea Party libertarian, where they really just like, they just want fascism. They just want, they want libertarianism for themselves and then, fascism for everyone else. And then New Zealand First, which is kind of like a right-wing populist kind of party, led by a guy who is just, like a huge grifter opportunist that's been kind of hanging around New Zealand politics for way too long. So we've got a coalition, the National, NZ First and ACT Party coalition, and they've all basically committed to a bunch of policies that will basically undo like 40 to 50 years of affirmative action and civil rights kind of progress for Maori and Pacifica in New Zealand, all in the name of creating a more equal society. It's pretty terrible. There's even people that have previously been aligned with all of these parties that have come out and been like, no, this is horrific. Like actual former MPs from National and NZ First, and actually in ACT as well, who are Māori, who have previously kind of, they've had a seat at the table in the past who are now kind of turning back and being like, okay, well, actually, no, this is too far. It's everything from like removing, like, how in public in a lot of countries that are like bilingual or multilingual, they'll have street signs that are in different languages. Over here, a lot of the time we'll have it in English and Maori at the same time, and they just want to remove, like, they just want it to be English, It's like, which is ridiculous because it's kind of like they're both there, like it's, yeah. So they've got all this idea about like ending race-based policies, and a lot of these policies are literally like affirmative action things to prevent health and education kind of outcomes that are linked to the kind of history of policies that deliberately disenfranchise Maori, even, things that are linked to like land dispossession and all this kind of stuff. So these policies were implemented initially not to give Maori an advantage, but to kind of like help Maori catch up. Like it's this kind of thing where it's like through colonization, we had like 150, 160 years since we had 100, something like that, since the treaty was signed and all this kind of stuff like that. And it's only been in sort of like the last 40 or so years that we've been able to claw some of that stuff back that was taken. And now it's like we're looking at policies that in a single term could undo all of that, which is just like really pretty scary considering how many of these policies are linked directly to public health. Health and education are the main ones, but like some of the more extreme elements in these parties are looking at literally just like scrapping the Treaty of Waitangi, which is like the kind of like it's basically considered like the founding document of our country. And like the interesting thing is a lot of these people in these parties believe that the treaty gives Maori special rights that other New Zealanders don't have, when in reality it's the only thing that gives non-Maori any rights at all in New Zealand, because it is, it's an agreement between the Crown and the Indigenous people sort of thing. These are all like hard-won rights, like all these things, like all of these initiatives, all of these kind of institutions that they're looking at getting back, and even just like the prevalence of Maori language, these were all things that were like won over like decades and decades of hard activism and like a lot of work. It's a really frustrating time because we're seeing some of the most disingenuous politicians that we've ever had in our country just being so disingenuous with the way that they are framing a lot of this stuff, presenting it under this banner of like, we are creating a new equal, New Zealand or whatever like that. It's like, yeah, it's wild. But there was a quote here from Professor Claire Charters from Auckland University, who is also the Indigenous rights leader for the New Zealand Human Rights Commission. She said, you can't just take a simplified approach that by treating people exactly the same, you're going to achieve equality. You're not. This effectively just prioritizes those who have power. New Zealand has one of the least equal education systems in the developed world. Maori children are 5 times more likely to be in state care, and 67% of female prisoners are Maori. International evidence shows self-determination can reverse these outcomes. So it's basically just like, instead of continuing the programs that have started to actually achieve an equal outcome, it's like, like instead of focusing on equal outcomes, it's focusing on the equal kind of treatment of everyone or whatever. And it's kind of like, if you have a very basic understanding of politics, history, all that kind of stuff, that might make sense, be like, oh, everyone gets the same opportunities. But then it's like you have to, for that to work, everyone has to have the same opportunities from birth, which is just not the case whatsoever,
I mean, like, look at like, not to keep making this my whole personality, but like, look at Gaza. Like,
no, absolutely.
You completely obliterate all their infrastructure. You orphan their children. You riddle them with diseases that they'll have to be fighting, and then you say, hey, you and say an Israeli can now both have the same opportunities because we both put you in the same system. Let's pretend in this, right? Because they don't. But like anyone could see that situation as being an inequality, because it's that you have to account for like the scenario, the context of which these people live in, and like the opportunities they have. If you don't have a home, you do not have an equal standing to a person who does have a home, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, but these policies are like really pervasive. A lot of it seems like it's just kind of like the whole political, like red versus blue football thing, where they're trying to attempt to undo the work of the former government. And it's stuff like, so just last year, the former government, the Labour-led government, introduced like changes to school curriculums, because there's never been an obligation to teach about a lot of New Zealand history stuff here. So like when I went to school, and a lot of my generation went to school, we didn't even really learn about things like I guess like the New Zealand Wars or anything like that, where it's like we didn't learn about a lot of the terrible stuff that happened to found like the state of New Zealand, you know. Obviously, like, you know, like I was already kind of like aware of a lot of the stuff coming from, you know, like a Maori background and all this kind of stuff like that. But in schools, we would learn things about like all kinds of stuff that was happening. You know, we would learn about the American Civil War, but we wouldn't learn about like the history of colonization in New Zealand. So the former Labour government actually added to the new history curriculum that they had to learn about, you know, like a lot of basic stuff like that, that is literally just like factual New Zealand history. And then they're already taking all of that out, and they're saying that removing this stuff is to provide balance, you know? And it's like this wild thing where it's like, so you're arguing that knowing the real history of our country is unbalanced because it's like, it's unfair to Pākehā to learn about the bad things that they're, you know, that their families may have done in the past, or like, you know, or like the bad things that created the systems that they now benefit from, you know, things like that. So to create balance, it's better that nobody knows, you know?
This is similar to like America's fight against critical race theory.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's exactly the same kind of culture war thing. And a lot of the politicians like David Seymour and Winston Peters are literally using the same framing and everything like that. Yeah, and it's really disingenuous as well, because so Winston Peters, who leads NZ First, is Maori. David Seymour has Maori ancestry. And so they use that as like this kind of deflection where they're like, oh, we're not being racist. How could I be racist? I'm Maori or whatever like that. Whereas Winston Peters has like a long history of being very anti-Maori, very like, you know, like everyone says like he's the guy that got the seat at the table, and now he's, you know, he's pulling up the ladder behind him. I think he's just very fundamentally very like just deranged. Like his politics just do not make sense aside from looking at them in a way that is like, this is a man that is out for himself. The other guy, the Libertarian Party leader, David Seymour, is a dude that grew up his entire life not knowing that he had any Maori ancestry. Then like his uncle found out doing like you know, like a little history dig up or whatever like that, and has since then has claimed it only to kind of deflect from his own racism. So it's like, yeah, okay, cool, like you do have Maori ancestry, you're in the club or whatever like that. That doesn't mean that it's a shield from any criticism or anything like that. And recently the Hapu, like the sub-tribe that he claims ancestry from, have actually started making public statements about him being like, dude, like we will straight up exile you, like, you know, then like basically being like, we like you use our name all the time, but we don't know you, you've never been up here, you're not like, you know, whatever. And it's like people act like that's like can't happen, but it totally can. Like these tribal relations rely on literally your relationship with the tribe, you know, with your connections to them and how you stand in, you know, context of the wider group. Like, you know, it's like, these are the people that you are accountable to and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, for someone to actually be told like, hey man, like we might just kind of exile you from the tribe, it's a huge deal. But I feel like this is one of those cases where it's like it would be absolutely justified for them to be like their statement is basically, if you continue this work to delegitimize the Treaty of Waitangi, then then see you later, bro, sort of thing. And I think it's like it's something that is like such an affront to Maori in general that I feel like it's absolutely justified, like. But a lot of people saying it's as if like, oh, you can't erase his history, like his family history with us. It's like that's not what's happening. But also he is someone that lived functionally his entire life as Pākehā, found out at a very late age that he is descended from like he has a Maori ancestor or whatever like that, and then uses that to gain power and shit on other Maori. It's like, fuck this guy, like I have absolutely no sympathy for whatever kind of disconnection that he gets.
You're saying he didn't know he was Maori until later?
Yeah, no, he has like some like great grandma. It's like the classic.
It feels like a very like Elizabeth Warren type situation.
Oh no, it absolutely is.
Even though she had no relatives, by the way, that were indigenous, just to be clear. But like indigeneity, my understanding of indigeneity is it's not something you can like just take you can't do a blood draw and be like, I am an indigenous person. Indigeneity is like about your relationship. Like it's a cultural thing.
That's the thing, right? Like it is so technically like the definition, like under the Maori understanding, like you could have a single ancestor all that way back there, and that does that means you're Maori, that whatever like that. But that doesn't mean anything if you're not actually like actively engaging in the culture and all this kind of stuff like that. And there are a lot of people out there that are like that, and they might say like, oh yeah, I have Maori ancestry, but I don't actively engage in the culture, or like a lot of people just wouldn't claim it or whatever. He's kind of in that camp, but he just claims it when it's politically advantageous to do so. And I think that there has been these kind of discussions that have been in the media lately about like, like everyone, if you have Maori ancestry, you should claim it, you should own it and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, I think that that's a good thing, but it's kind of that thing where it's like, okay, if you're going to claim it, especially if you're going to claim it because it's politically advantageous to do so, like, what are you giving back? Like, and yes, so the spokesperson from Ngāti Rehea, who is the hapu that he is descended from, have said like, like it's not so much about what you claim, but it's about who claims you, So I think it is, for him, it has been a long time coming. Hopefully there is some way to prevent a lot of this stuff. It's not a single bill that they're doing. It's kind of like they're looking at kind of undoing different departments and different legislation, all this kind of stuff like that. There is opportunity for it to be challenged at different points. I think there would be huge public pushback from, not just from Maori, but from younger people in general. Like the statistic was something like 80% of New Zealanders in support of things as they are with the treaty or whatever like that. And then there's like, it was like 20% would like, I think it's just basically 20% of people don't understand it and like, like seek further clarification or something like that, which I think is like funny because it's like a lot of the educational stuff, like a lot of the history curriculum stuff that they added was literally to help people understand what the treaty means and the history of it, why it was signed, who signed it, for what purpose, and all this kind of stuff. But that's the kind of stuff that they're wanting to take out. Like, and I think like in a legitimate effort to undermine it. So yeah, that's what's happening down here. We'll see how it goes. I'll probably pop in with a couple updates into the news every now and then as it unfolds. But that is our news section for this week. So before we get into the main chunk of the show, I'd just like to remind you all that if you like what we're doing here, if you like our show and want to support it, you can jump on over to our Patreon. So that is patreon.com/red_planet. We've got multiple tiers for different levels of support that get you everything from, there's like access to the Discord, to like special little private Patreon only shows, well, not shows, but like hangout kind of streams. There's, we get like little pin badges and stickers and stuff. And we also have a merch store that you can check out as well. We'll do a full promo at the end of the show and explain all the different tiers and stuff. But you can head on over there, patreon.com/red_planet, if you want to take a look in the meantime. Yeah, awesome. So why don't I pass you over to Mule, and you can give us a little intro into what this episode's going to be about.
Okay, thanks Tim, thanks Kira, thanks everyone. Yeah, it's a Mule show.
You're welcome.
Yeah, okay. I am welcome actually,
yes,
aren't I?
You may begin.
I'm welcome in your house, aren't I, Kira? Anytime.
Because we're friends.
Because we're friends. Because we're friends.
Friends are welcome in each other's places.
Not because I'm going to steal all your stuff. Nothing to do with that. This episode is by me. It's about housing. Building class consciousness is integral to any kind of organizing, establishing power structures and how and why they relate to someone's material conditions is key, and sometimes the most difficult part of building dual power. The housing struggle is a perfect way to highlight this, in this host's opinion. It's also really easy to tell someone why a landlord is abusing their power and how systemic that is. Social class boundaries are also smashed as soon as people with more privilege are shown just how similar or worse off those less privileged are in the housing struggle. In this episode, I aim to explain to my co-hosts and everyone listening just why a national rent strike or something of that nature could end landlordism in less than a month. So, yeah, this is something that I've wanted to speak about for a long time. Just sort of have a big episode on it. And I'm sure we'll have more and more episodes on this. What's something that actually genuinely, uniquely is a massive crisis in most countries. Homelessness, it's something that fucks everybody over. Everybody needs to have a house. It's up there with, workers' rights, healthcare, all that kind of stuff, This is one of the basic material needs that people need. And as I said, the main reason as to why I wanted to do an episode on this is because of that. I think it's extremely it's like one of the core tenets in anti-capitalist thought. Marx did a whole impassioned bunch of pages in Das Kapital about the enclosure of the commons and just how private land is, extremely bad, extremely fucked up, just in an ideological sense. So yeah, I'm going to go through a bunch of stuff today and try and, encourage my co-hosts to get involved as much as possible.
By the way, I totally remember that part of Das Kapital.
Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah. That was the one part after the part with the talking about the
after all the maths.
Yeah, they were talking about the money. And I remember getting to that part where you're talking about and being like, wow, I'm definitely reading this.
Well, yeah, this is the thing. It's something that I actually went back and had a look at because that first part is so dry. So anyway, whatever. But here's the thing, we can make this a lot easier for everybody to understand. And hopefully we can do that today. Now, Kira and or Tim, what would you understand if I said to you the words the tenant class? Don't look at the notes. Don't look at the show notes that we all have access to.
I think the tenant class is a group of people that don't own the place they live and are now forced to have to by whatever situation they're in. They are under the thumb of the landlord. They have to pay their income. How do I put this in more Marxy terms? They sell their labor, and the money that they acquire from selling their labor, a good portion of it has to go to a person that owns property that they live in.
But it's also beneficiaries and stuff as well who don't necessarily sell their labor. So I would say basically anyone that doesn't own property right?
Yep. What I was looking for was like descriptors of people, but that's okay. You both have like the general understanding of it. Of course you do. You're my co-hosts on Red Planet. But I would describe the tenant class as any combination and, basically collection of these types of people. So private tenants, so people who are renting privately, they rent from either a corporate landlord or a private landlord. Then social tenants who rent from basically government owned or government regulated bodies. Lodgers who live in with a landlord. Licensees, sort of like people who are in a tenant position but they don't have a contract, so they might have a license on a website like Spare Room or Home Share or something like that. Then after that, we've got squatters. Squatters are basically, the part of the tenant class, and I'll get a little bit into this later on. And in the same sort of sphere as squatters, homeless people, right? And the reason that I have such a broad sort of net there of people is because I truly believe that the housing struggle is connected in that regard. A landlord is not someone who is ever really at risk of going homeless, unless something catastrophic happens to them, where like something like a rent strike or a revolution, the people love Chairman Mao, all this kind of stuff. Would that person ever be at risk of like being a homeless person? Never be at risk of suffering from the violence. Basically, I want people to think of it. I saw a really, really good quote. I think it was from Engels. I can't be sure. It's one of these TikTok ones that was coming up. I saw a really good quote, which was like, any system that forces people to, break their back, put themselves in life-threatening situations in order to take part in the system should be described as what it is, which is violence, right? That is violence, and if death results from that, then it is murder. And we should just look at it in terms of that.
Yeah, that does sound like, I think that's Engels' social murder, where it's like not, like the concept of social murder is when it's not directly, like it's not the state directly murdering someone, like a cop or an executioner or something like that, but they have created a system, like the state has a system that that effectively funnels people towards death or anything like that.
Yeah, literally that. If it's people who are at risk of violence from the system and people who perpetrate that violence, right? So speaking of that, the latter, the landlord class. Now, knowing about the answer that I wanted from the previous question, what comes to both of your minds when I say the landlord class?
Well, it's not just people that own property, right?
Yes.
Because if you own property, you're not a landlord per se, but you're saying that. But are you saying that they are people that just own property and you're in the landlord class, or have you be
no?
So it's people that own property, but then are they're a landlord.
Yeah, and so I would say, like the idea of housing as like private property probably has a lot to do with it, where it's like it doesn't necessarily have to be an individual, because it could be like, there is like a lot of housing that's owned by the state and all that kind of stuff like that. I would say anyone that controls housing for the purpose of like other people living in it. Yeah.
And again, that thinking of it in those same terms, anyone who, as a result of their relation to the tenant class, can impose violence and potentially death on the tenant class, right?
Yeah, like I feel like for me, it's like, like the people that control access to housing.
Yes, absolutely. So if we were to talk about people who control the access to housing, we could be super broad and we could say things like banks, mortgage lenders, etc. Do you know what I mean? People like that. That's certainly part of it. But just to keep things simple, let's think about types of landlords and types of people who are basically in control of like who gets housed and who doesn't. So people who've inherited a property other than their own and choose to rent it. So these are like your tiny baby landlords, right? They've got one rental, one private. They've got their own house. They've got this house. And then you've got people who have multiple properties. And I would say anyone who has more than two. And these are your sort of like bigger landlords. And connected to that, what we call the slumlord, which is where basically people buy up extremely shit properties, give them the bare basics, sometimes even less than that, charge extortionate rents for them, etc. Then you've got the corporate landlord, which is whereby a letting agent or a someone who runs a business where they actually like have staff, like multiple members of staff, where it becomes like a small to medium sized business, then becomes a corporatized, and they are then sort of like buying houses, letting them out as a business, as a large sort of business, rather than like, your standard garden variety landlord. And then on top of that, in this country at least, I would say social housing providers. Not sure what it's like in Aotearoa. I think we've spoken about this before. It's fairly similar. You got like social housing, but it's getting deeply unregulated, and therefore that's leaving it open to like privatization and
Yeah, we're in a bit of a weird spot with it at the moment, where a couple governments ago, well, like over successive governments have just sold off as much like public housing as possible to like these small landlords, and even to actually like bigger landlord companies and stuff. And so the government is trying to like rebuild a lot of housing units now for people to buy to fix the housing crisis, but also a percentage of them are for like social housing and stuff. But like the whole project hasn't really worked out, and it's kind of like, yeah, it's a bit of a mess at the moment.
That is exactly what is going on here.
Wow. These outcomes that neoliberalism kind of like guarantees, right?
Yes. This is the thing. This is why the housing struggle is like so, like, it's underrated in terms of revolutionary capacity, in my opinion, which is what this sort of like episode is all about. Because if you think about it, like, I don't even really need to have a broad understanding. I don't need to be a housing expert. I guess I don't know. I've been doing this for like 2 years now, but I wouldn't call myself an expert. You don't need to be like a housing expert, a housing solicitor, trained for years and years and years to be able to see the comparisons of what's going on in Aotearoa, the UK, and also the US. Like the US has like not just that kind of stuff going on, but also like absolutely absurd sort of like comparisons via state, right? Because in each state it's different. Like in Illinois it's going to be something, in New Hampshire it's going to be something, in Texas it's going to be something, and it's all so very, very varied. So like I don't know if there's anything that you could like shed a light on that, like regarding social housing. I know like social housing in the States is called like Section 52 or something. It's like a number, a 50 number. Do you know what I'm on about?
Yeah, I forget the exact name. Give me section 8.
Section 8 housing. That's it. Section 8 housing. So yeah, and that's like, yeah, it's people who like apply through welfare to get housing, right? Like that's the broad bones of it.
I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I'm pretty sure it's like they get a discounted rate. There's landlords that provide Section 8 housing, and they get kickbacks for it, and so on and so forth.
That is like basically like you don't have council houses in the way that we have them here in the UK. Like you don't have like people who could just like be housed. I do just want to like verify that, like, even though I'm talking about, oh, the US doesn't have that, it doesn't work properly here. It doesn't work properly at all. It doesn't fucking house people whatsoever.
I also want to point out that I'm not positive about my description of Section 8 housing, so nobody like take what I said as any sort of like textbook evaluation. But that's just like
the broad strokes are just what's important now to understand the importance of, listen, what I'm saying is that if you decided to get involved in the housing struggle in the US, I'm certain that you would come up with the exact same things that we have here in the UK. Be a little bit different, being probably a bit more state violence, supporting landlords, but yeah. Anyway, this is the next bit that I want to talk about now, because this is something that like everybody all around the world is going to have as a result. And what's the big topic at the moment? Well, it's Palestine, and you could definitely apply all these things to Palestine. You could definitely apply all these things to like any marginalized people who are getting like focused on and discriminated against, particularly. And again, this is like why the housing struggle is so intersectional. Like, it's so fucking intersectional. Everybody needs a house, and when it comes down to it, we all basically like need the same material conditions when it comes to housing. So any kind of like social class divides that you have, as soon as the housing struggle kind of like, illuminates what people have and what they don't, people start to realize, oh, actually, it's not about foreigners trying to steal my jobs or houses. They don't have an easy time coming over here. They actually like have a shit house just like me. So, you know, and I'll be talking more about that later. So let's talk about violence from landlords. This is what this next bit is about. You two are tenants. I know this for a fact. What kind of unsafe living conditions have you A, experienced, or B, are going through right now? I'll start. One of the very first places I rented just had like the worst damp. I'm talking like it didn't matter how long the heating was on for, and even though the heating was on, like it was such an old boiler, like it was fucking old as fuck. You know, it's like yellow from like cigarette smoke, and no one had smoked in the house in years anyway. And do you know what I mean? It was just like disgusting and broken and all that. And but my bedroom was so vile. It was like sometimes I would sit on. I had basically at this time in my life, I had 2 PA speakers that I'd just like acquired from raves or whatever, and I'd put like cushions on them just as like a sort of makeshift couch. And those cushions used to be like wet when we would like sit on them. You would hear them go like, it was just fucking gross. So that's me. That's an unsafe living condition because if people aren't aware, damp can cause mold. Mold can cause breathing problems. And just generally speaking, it's depressing. It's depressing.
Mold and broken heater.
Yep.
And this isn't like okay, to be clear, this isn't a specific like landlord problem, but this is a problem across rental properties in Seattle. Is they're not required to have air conditioning, but it gets really hot in Seattle summers, but just not hot enough for long enough, I guess, or something. But it's a very hot. People die every time there's a heat wave, and there's heat waves more and more now, and they're getting more and more intense. And so, yeah, like I don't think that has been resolved. I don't live in Seattle anymore, but it's absolutely an issue. So it's an across the board thing. And then
that's a huge one.
Also, like, just like, I remember there's this one time there was like these like wires that were just like poking through in like my bathroom, and like they're just sparking. It was just like some really unsafe stuff. I'm sure. Oh, there was also a ceiling leak because we lived on the top floor, and they had that big bubble that happens.
Yeah, when it's under the paint. Yeah.
And so my roommate and I, what we would do is we take a little thing under it because it happened every time the snow melted. So we would pop it and we put it
like
in, and we would carry the water, and we say it's fresh house water. Fresh
Sell
water
it on
straight
the market.
from the house. Yeah.
House milk.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's wild. Yeah, I mean, I've had all of those same issues at various places over the years, but one thing that is notorious in housing down here is leaky homes and black mold. And it's been an ongoing thing where it's like, so we've had multiple big issues in the country before about about bad building standards. We're a small country, and there have been a bunch of times over the years when different developers have worked with the government to just smash out a shitload of housing. Like, they've just been like, okay, cool. You know, over the next 10 years, we're just going to get this many houses done. They're doing it at the moment. And it always goes terribly because of, you know, neoliberalism or whatever, where for various cost saving measures or whatever like that, they skirt around regulation. They, you know, or even like, the government will actually change legislation to make it easier for them. And so we end up with like these big issues where it's like, for years it was leaky homes because of inferior, you know, products. There was problem with like the cladding on a lot of houses, all this kind of stuff. And it all basically ends up being leaky and moldy houses. Even these days, a lot of the houses that they've been making, even though some of these issues are decades old, where it's been like the #1 thing on the news every night or whatever, but it still continues to happen because, yeah, a lot of these big developers just have like a ridiculous amount of pull with the government. And because of some of these companies like Fletcher's working on these big projects with the government, these giant like Kiwi build contracts and things like that, the government is kind of like in this position with them where they kind of have to appease the developers to kind of maintain, like to commit to actually deliver on their commitments for building houses and stuff. So we were just seeing these these regulations and stuff getting weakened and stripped back, which end up in like thousands and thousands of like rental properties that don't meet the established criteria for what is like a rentable house or whatever, but everyone just like lives in them because they don't have any other choice, you know. Like it's a housing crisis. Like, okay, you don't want to live in this leaky home, you'll go live in the next leaky home, you know. Like yeah, it's like, it's really bad. And it's, yeah, the black mold is a huge issue as well, which is like, you know, like it's terrible for your lungs and everything like that, especially for kids growing up and stuff. Like I know so many people that I've lived with in the past and stuff that have had like, you know, like they've thought that they've had asthma, or even like they have had asthma and they found out later that they've moved out of these houses and like all of a sudden they can breathe again and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's not just like black mold on the ceiling in your bathroom or whatever like that. It's like it's inside the walls and just, yeah, it's terrible. So those are like super common things that the average renter down here has probably dealt with, you know,
so
numerous times.
These are all things as well that like I've heard of here in the UK. No, the AC thing, obviously that's like a unique sort of like, you know, hot country thing. We're not really a hot country. I mean, we're getting to be a hot country, what with climate change and all.
Whoa, look forward to that.
Yeah, oh boy, oh Nelly. But let's talk some more about some violence from landlords. So yeah, like the most key thing I want to like point out that you mentioned there, Tim, is like people don't have any choice. So, you know, we're talking about these like incredibly unsafe houses to live in where like, you know, to the average person, like a bit of mold, yeah, okay, I could probably deal with that. Do you know what I mean? Just keep cleaning it down. It's all right. And then it will be fine, you know, but then again, how much time are you going to have to clean this mold? Are you going to be able to reach all the places where it goes, et cetera, et cetera? And people end up having to deal with it and deal with these health problems. And the reason for that is, like you say, they don't have a choice because landlords raise the fucking rent all the time. Now, this is something that happens like just in general because landlords are greedy bastards. They want to make as much money, exploit as much money from the working class as humanly possible. Well, a tenant class, if we stick with our on point, you know, sort of discussion here. You, in terms of rent rises, even when they don't happen outside of like a rental period, even when a landlord raises the rent to a tenant, let's say, let's do a game, Kira, right? I'm gonna hate this because even pretending for like a minute that I'm a landlord makes me feel sick to my stomach. But I'm your landlord. I come to you. You've been living in my property for 6 months, and I say to you, okay, as per the tenancy agreement, I'm putting the rent up from £900 a month to £1,200. All right, this is your month's notice. What do you do?
Well, now I have a month to try to maybe move, which is very difficult given that oftentimes where I live is tied to, I mean, in my situation, I'm a single woman, so it's a little easier for me, but not necessarily for everybody. Also, I have family here, so I still have ties. You know, I hopefully get to know my neighbors, which I don't really, because my neighbors, I live in a cop town. It's not really a great place, but get to know my neighbors. You know, like, so any ties in my community have to be severed. All my everything I'm familiar with, you know, and I also have to somehow relocate all of my stuff. That costs a lot of money. And I have to find a time to search for new apartments. And by the way, this could easily happen to me in the next place I go to. So, and oftentimes where I work is right next to where I live. So I might even have to consider, who knows what I have to consider depending on like my transportation options. I don't have a car, so I'm glad that I live at home. But if I work at home, but if I didn't work at home, this would be a real problem for trying to figure out logistics for me getting to work or if I need a new job or not.
Yeah, this is it. And notice, everybody, the first thing the beautiful, sweet Kara did was she said, I would have to leave. Right. And that is just one of the many tools that landlords have in basically forcing people out of their property. You know, if it's illegal to evict someone in a certain scenario, for example, they can do this, right? If it's illegal to do this, then they could keep not doing the repair in the properties like we spoke about. The biggest thing that people have is disrepair. And the biggest thing that makes people want to move out of places is disrepair. You know, unsafe living conditions. You know, you spoke about a place where the boiler was broke.
I said the heater was broken.
So, like, you know, if I mean, in the UK, people are definitely witnessing it now. It's like this in my fucking apartment, but it's so cold, I can barely heat the fucking place. And, you know, if you are underneath a certain amount of temperature for like an extended period of time. So when people talk about like hearing damage, it's not necessarily like, you know, like a very loud noise that's like lasts like a second or something that does like massive damage to your hearing. It's more like prolonged hearing, like a higher than normal. Do you know what I mean? A higher than normal volume for an extended period of time.
A lot of tattooists get that from of the sound that our machines make. Well, like it depends on what kind of machines that you're using, but coil machines operate like the noise that they make is like a very kind of higher frequency thing, and just like repeated exposure to that kind of removes that section of your hearing frequency or whatever. So I can imagine, yeah, if you were around like an environmental noise that was like that, you would you'd be affected in a similar way.
So in the same way, that's kind of how like exposure works, right? Like even if you're not at like drastic threat to human life temperatures, let's say if you're just below room temperature, right? In the UK, we have a bit of legislation called the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, which I've definitely mentioned on the show before, but it basically says, and this is due to not just like, you know, lobbying power, you know, whatever, it's not just something random that people found out. It's based on science, based on doctors' reports, based on health reports. Anything below 21 degrees Celsius, don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, work it out yourselves, is going to be damaging to human health over long-term periods.
That's 69.8 degrees Fahrenheit, which is basically 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah, my place was very cold. It was way colder than this.
You can get like a lot of you know, adverse health effects just from like prolonged exposure to something below that you know, temperature. What do they call it? Like a
room temperature?
Yeah, below room temperature. I was gonna come up with something smart, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, so yeah, you've got those like unsafe living conditions. So like, you know, lack of room temperature, warm. Basically, do you need a warm place to live? If there are things like you say, like the whatchamacallit, you were talking about this before, Kira, electricity wires fizzing around, like electric hazards, let's call them.
Yeah, exposed wires.
Like any kind of unsafe exposed wiring, or like, you know, not up to standard building, you know, containing, you know, electrics and wiring and stuff like that. It's so extremely dangerous. That could be like one, you know, mistake and boom, you're dead. You know, an electric shock, it can fucking kill you. So stuff like that. There's all kinds of things like that, like pests. A big one, I think, in the US is like radon in the basement or something. I think maybe that's in, because there are a lot of places that have basements. In the US, it's not like a very common thing. In the UK, maybe in Aotearoa as well, I'm not sure, but like, you know, radiation basically. It's not like a big thing, but it's definitely like a unique thing that I'd never heard of in the UK. I was like, oh shit, they do like basement apartments and people can get like people can get radiation poisoning. Crazy.
Yeah, that's like definitely not a thing I've heard of down here. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there was someone out there with a radioactive basement flat, like, but no, yeah, I don't know if that's as much of a problem.
Anyway, I don't have much experience with radon, but like, you know, it's you know, in terms of like you know, just kind of like expanding, like making sure the US people listening can actually, like, you know, relate to it a little bit. I'm sure they can relate to rent rises and unsafe living.
Trying to make this stream accessible. I'll speak for all Americans. We appreciate it. We're not always included in conversation, so it feels good.
That's right. So let's talk about one of the biggest, you know, ways that landlords enact violence on people, and that is eviction. They love to do it, don't they? They love to do it. We literally just had a landlord in the chat saying, if you don't pay rent, it's bye-bye time. Yeah, it feels good, doesn't it, to do that? Feels good to just, waltz your power all over people who have to pay you in order to fucking have a shelter over their heads, you vile piece of shit fuck. So, this is the thing, like, getting evicted. Now, I'm going to talk a lot about class in this episode, and I think because it's really important, because there are some people for whom eviction is not too much of a big deal, right? I know that I have like family members who would like put me up for a bit, right? If I was evicted, so that's part of my privilege. Now that might not even be the case for someone who looks exactly the same as me, who has the same privilege as me. Maybe someone has got like a traumatic family experience, so they don't have family that they can go and stay with. Maybe they don't even have friends that they can stay with. But generally speaking, when we're talking about like, class, marginalized people in their social class, in terms of like, I want to like just give you a snapshot of like, my experience. This isn't like, it's going to vary, but I think like overwhelmingly with housing activism in the UK, the most vulnerable people we find are migrants, people who come here, they're going through the asylum system because they just have zero connections here. And I want to just relate that, Kira, to what you were saying about a rent rise, where if your landlord put up the rent, you would have to move, taking up all your ties, no friends, no community, nothing like that. Now imagine if that's like another fucking country, right? And then a landlord is doing the same again, right? This is why it's all related. When we talk about activism, we say think global, act local. Thinking globally, people are dispossessed all the time, forced out of their homes. Their homes are destroyed. They have nowhere to live. They become homeless. They become in debt because of being unable to pay extortionate rents, etc., etc. Anyway, so eviction is like the most vile thing that people can happen. I want to draw people's attention to a story that literally happened last night in my home city. A homeless man died because he was outside. That's just what happened. Like, it's too cold right now. Homeless guy. There are loads of homeless people in the UK. There's homeless people all over the world. Look, this is what happens. If you force people out onto the street, they will die. It's a death sentence. I remember saying this to some cops when I was on an eviction resistance with like, the perfect, picture citizen of what a cop should consider a citizen to be, a war veteran. Who had PTSD and problems, like they were helping the social landlord evict him, which actually they legally aren't even allowed to do. I said this to them: you are killing someone. This person doesn't have anywhere to go. That's the end of it. And of course they don't listen, because they don't want to listen, because they just shut their eyes to this stuff. Some of them revel in it, actually. So eviction is one of the most vile things ever. Depending on your material conditions, depending on your privilege, depending on your relationships, can drastically change just how, I guess, violent that is for you. Even if you are like privileged in the sense that you have friends that you can go and live with, you have friends that you can go and couch surf with. Being in a position of homelessness, whether or not you're on the streets or whether or not you are like being put up by a friend, puts on you this overwhelming depression where you are basically like, yeah, I'm a burden. I'm a fucking burden right now. I can't do anything. Like, I need help from the state. I don't have an address, so I can't get it. Even if I did have an address, it'd be really fucking hard to get help anyway, because the government doesn't want to fucking give money out, despite what reactionary conservatives say. So, every single aspect of homelessness is completely fucked. And the majority of it is because of landlords. Very, very, very few people choose to be homeless on purpose.
Can I say that it's so annoying when we're talking about homelessness and someone shows up and is like, I talked to a homeless person and they said they prefer it this way. And then now they just go around having like the one conversation, or sometimes not even a real conversation. Let's just face it. I don't think these people actually talk to homeless people, but they hear from someone who heard from someone that one time a homeless guy talked about how he doesn't want to actually have a home. And now homelessness is actually great. So there it is.
They spoke to like a very, very rich upper middle class white college trust fund kid who chose to leave home to live in the woods with like a bunch of money, was able to like, build a house on some stolen indigenous land or something.
Some extended Burning Man type fucking shit.
Yeah, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I much prefer this, dude. Yeah, I'm technically homeless and I prefer it." So anyway,
is that your American, by the way?
That's my American. That's specifically no, because like my general American is like, "Hello, I'm an American," and like but that one that I was doing specifically then was like
American
trustafarian, like a trustafarian, like a white guy with dreads that smokes weed. Anyway, there you go. Moving on. So eviction is vile. It's one of the worst things ever. Physical threats. Your landlord may be a utter bastard. And on top of that, they might also physically threaten to harm you. And there may be other implications there. It may come in the form of sexual harassment. It may come in the form of sexual assault. It may come in the form of actual physical assault. It may come in murder. I want to, again, relate this to current struggles that people are talking about. Palestinians killed in, Turtle Island in the USA. I can't remember exactly which state it was. I think it might have been Illinois or Indiana. I can't remember. But literally, a Palestinian kid and his mum got stabbed by their landlord, right? And this is something like where, a landlord is enabled by their position to think that they have some kind of power. They do have power, that's for sure, but they think that they have like, some kind of like exception to the rule from the law. Now, why would that be? Why would a landlord think that they have an exception to the rule of law? And generally speaking, this is because across the board, landlords operate outside of the law, right? This is what they do, and they are enabled by the legislation to do this. But anyway, that's just like a small bit on physical threats. It's quite obvious. Tied into that is discrimination. If you're a woman, a feminized person in any way, if you're queer, if you're transgender, if you're, a woman of any description, if you're gonna get like, some kind of discrimination. And if you're a racialized person, of course, there's going to be discrimination there as well, potentially, overwhelmingly so, because we know that the landlord class is overwhelmingly white, cis, and heterosexual male. So this is also like something to consider. And this is the thing, like on top of all that stuff, it's your rights are systematically, I guess, removed via power, right? So landlords who think they're above the law because they are constantly treated as if they are above the law. If some landlords are in government positions, MPs, ministers, if they have like a vast amount of wealth where they're able to like buy really good lawyers to fight their case in court, then they're able to do that. They are enabled by the system to bypass the law. Whatever protections tenants have, whether they are like real in legislation or not, the system of capital basically protects them. Overwhelmingly so, right? They're going to be able to get around a sexual harassment suit. They're going to be able to get around a murder, a homicide lawsuit. They're going to be able to like find ways where like maybe they won't serve the right amount of prison time, or maybe they'll get off scot-free, right? So this is it. Now, every single kind of tenant experiences this stuff. Homeless people obviously are at the like very brunt of this, because they've already experienced like the basic, well, yeah, I guess it would be like, this is like the long, slow, drawn out death, sort of like death sentence kind of thing. This is what being homeless kind of is for the majority of people. But like, just as like, homeless people are already like on that end of it, middle class people, whether they like it or not, whether they see it or not, even though they haven't developed this class consciousness, possibly, they are like a couple of bad interactions with some people from being in that position, right? So like, say they fall out with the parents in a really, really bad fucking way. Say they have like no fucking friends because everyone thinks they're a posh toff who's got no fucking clue. You know what I mean? You never know. Like, this is just something that can happen. So that's violence from landlords. Now, talking about the class stuff, this is what I wanted to sort of like bridge this into. And I guess like when I say building class consciousness, you broadly speaking, when people think of class consciousness, they think of working class consciousness, and that's great. You know, your relation to capital, super important, but within that there are loads of different types of class, right? So there's your social class. So I'm a queer guy, right? And that's my social class. Like if I'm openly queer, you know, unabashedly queer everywhere I go, there are some people who are going to make me, you know, make it known that they're not okay with that, right? And I'm very lucky that I can like hide that shit. Kira as a social class as a woman, and Tim, like I don't know how much you experience this, like your socialized class as a Maori, would that be right to say? Like,
I mean, there are all kinds of like class things like associated with your identity as being like Maori in New Zealand or whatever like that, and it is kind of like interesting. You know, like the racialized aspect is like a huge thing where it's kind of like even as, you know, like a racialized citizen or whatever like that, like witnessing it from other like landlords that are, you know, like I've had landlords that are like Asian, I've had landlords that are like Indian, I've had landlords that are white, all these kind of different races and stuff like that, and the way that they will also like I've had landlords say to me, like I had an Asian landlord say to me that I'm glad that she was glad that I came along because she didn't want to let in another Indian tenant. And it's just like shit like that, where it's just like, this is wild, where it's like your class interests as a landlord immediately, like, you know, kind of like eclipse like any kind of like, you know, like racialized solidarity or whatever like that. So I mean, I've never had a Maori landlord, but I know people that do, and that are just like, oh, you know, like they're just as shit to us as anyone else, you know, like that. It's just like, it's wild. But I do think there are like certain things and stuff like that, like you know, like I've had people ask before about like this kind of like idea that you know, like it's the idea that Maori and Pacifica people, because they usually have like kind of like tight and large like family groups or whatever like that. It's kind of like this, like, how many people are going to be living here? Is your family going to be coming in here? Are you going to be drinking in the garage every night? So, you know, just like shit like that, like these weird things like that, where it's like, man, like, I mean, I'm not even like particularly like my family, I'm particularly tight. Like I drink like one beer every 3 months or something like that. You know, it's like, do you ask everyone else that comes in? I know obviously I've got like heaps of tattoos and all this kind of shit and stuff like that as well. But you know, there are like assumptions. Like I remember the landlord that I had that mentioned not wanting another Indian tenant. She was like talking about like, oh, because, you know, like their cooking stinks up the whole plate and just like shit like that, you know, like, so there are these like kind of like assumptions about different you know, like different tenants and race and all that kind of stuff.
I personally would say that like Indian cooking smells amazing.
I know. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's so absurd. But I appreciate that, Tim. And like, I think like that's a really important insight as well, is that like, you know, racialized people will experience this social class traitorism. You know, as a result of you know, a landlord, you know, being from the same background ethnically, culturally as them, you know, and then also witnessing like, or like, you know, just sort of like doing this class traitorism against like their own sort of like social class as well. Like it's very sort of like, you know, I don't doubt for a second that there's going to be like, you know, one like a cis gay white guy out there who's a landlord and like just hates transgender people. Do you know what I mean? And he like rented to a transgender person once, and then another queer person comes along and goes, "Oh, I'm so glad there's not another one of those." You know, well, maybe they'll say something worse than just transgender person.
I'm sure there's white gay landlords that hate gay tenants.
Yeah, for real.
I'm sure there's Pete Buttigieg types that are like, "Oh, well, those are the scandalous like like sexual gays or
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah, yeah.
like that. Like,
You boys gonna be running trains in here?
Yeah, they're always having orgies. You know, they call themselves queers, which is like a slur. Do you know what I mean?
You better not be dropping lube on the carpet.
Well, if it's silicone lube, that shit is quite hard to get out. But yeah, no.
It's just in. We just got reports that Mule is in fact having sexy orgies in his apartment all the time.
Whoa! It's crazy that happens, and I have sex all the time, every day. I'm having sex right now, anyway. So yeah, you know, you're going to experience this like class traitorism, and also, I think just coming back to this concept of building class consciousness amongst tenants, let's talk about tenant power. Tim, you probably know the answers to this because you did like a whole video on it, not specifically tenant power, but dual power. But if I said to you tenant power, Kira, what would that mean to you?
That would mean kind of just like any sort of power that a marginalized group can gain. I would consider be a collective action of organizing and having class consciousness, organizing together, and using that power to, I don't know if tenant power necessarily means abolishing landlords, but to take steps toward you know, at least alleviating a lot of that disparity.
Yep. Tim, any notes?
I mean, I would say that like any way to kind of like leverage power against the landlord class or whatever, but I would say, yeah, like particularly the power gained through organizing, you know, like it's this thing, like when I think of like tenant power, I think of like the kind of the collective power of, you know, tenants as a group as opposed to like the individual. Which I guess, yeah, I mean that kind of speaks.
No, yeah.
Well, I mean, like if you're a regular red planeteer, or if you're one of us, then you understand how those things I think are linked. But yeah,
for sure. So yeah, you're both absolutely right, and Kira, you are spot on in your tentative guess that yes, it could absolutely abolish landlordism. We're going to move on to how that is possible later on. So when we talk about tenant power, we have to understand. We've spoken about power structures. We've spoken about where landlords are. The landlord class is in relation to tenants. And so with that power that landlords abuse all the time, we have to be able to collectively challenge it, right? So I always love Tim's graphic in his video on dual power of like a big castle and then another smaller castle sort of like growing and growing and growing and growing and growing alongside it. And that's basically what it is. And ultimately the tenant castle is, you know, a fucking formidable citadel, like kind of like Barad-dûr from Lord of the Rings. You know, it's like huge in comparison to the landlord castle because there are so many of us. You know, in terms of like homeowners, you know, even people who own homes like are still sort of like paying mortgage to a bank, and you could like lose that from a you know, a bad sort of like payment run or whatever.
Actually, this brings, I was waiting for the Q&A to ask this question, but might as well do it now, because Apple Chips, the video game, said earlier, can I make the point that most people who have mortgages are in basically the same position as renters, except that the system that enforces violence against them is a bureaucratic bank? And I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, since you're mentioning it right now.
Yeah, no. I'm happy to speak on that for sure. Like, look, you know, if you have a mortgage, no one, I don't think anyone in the tenant class is like sat there saying, you're a traitor and you can no longer organize with us and you're not allowed to come to our meetings and look at us and blah, blah, blah. I don't think anybody's saying that. What you do have to remember is that you have like significantly more protections than tenants. So I would, and that again is dependent on like where you live in the world. So, you know, I wouldn't like to broadly say people who have mortgages are the same as tenants, because like people who have mortgages can be landlords. So, you know, I don't know. I would tentatively.
Also, having a mortgage is something that, you know, unless you have like a really, really bad mortgage, it's meant to be paid off, right?
Yeah.
Which is rent. When rent, if you're a renter, you are perpetually forever a renter.
Yeah.
until you become a person who does not rent.
You don't have any kind of, you know, when people talk about like you know, feeling like there's no hope, there's no you know, support, like there's no end to the struggle, like you are no longer part of the struggle because you understand that, like, all right, well, I'm in debt, but one day it'll actually be mine. Do you know what I mean?
I can tell you that, like, knowing that I pay rent does something to my brain every single fucking day.
Yes.
It's something I think about literally every day. I think about my vulnerability. I think about how I'm not building towards anything.
Yeah.
Like I think about it. It feels like there's like a stab in my body, and every day I'm leaking something.
Mm-hmm.
Like some part of me is like being expelled every single day because I do not own the place I live. Sorry for the gross description, but it makes sense in my head.
But like, also, the rent that you're fucking paying doesn't even go to the stuff it's supposed to go towards, because all the shit that's going wrong in your gaff is still fucked, and they won't come around and fix it. You know, it's just so much stuff
in my gaff.
In your gaff.
I think there is something interesting there, though, where it's like, yeah, like you were saying, it depends on where you're at in the world. In New Zealand at the moment, there's like a bit of a kind of crisis. It's kind of similar to, you know, like what America had with the subprime mortgage crisis, sort of thing like that, where a lot of people signed on to these mortgages. Like there was, for years, it was this thing like, oh, the housing market is going so good. The best thing you can do, like as a young couple or whatever, is like you need to buy a house immediately because all the houses, like the price is going up and up and up. So all these people did, and a lot of people did make a lot of money out of it. But most of the people making the money were the people that were like, you know, like flipping houses or buying them in bulk, doing this kind of stuff. Whereas like a lot of people that came in on the tail end, like people that bought houses in the last like 1 or 2 years or whatever, these are like generally people that are buying them for themselves, you know, like to raise a family in or whatever like that. Now that their interest rates are changing, you know, because there's usually, when you get a mortgage or whatever, you get a period where it's like your interest rate is locked in and they get reevaluated every now and then. So it's like people I know, I saw an old friend of mine that I went through school with, and he's like, yeah, me and my, you know, wife, we finally bought a house. And then as soon as our interest rate gets unfreezed, we're going to be in negative equity. So they're basically just like, okay, now, you know, you owe more to the bank than your house is actually worth and all this kind of stuff. So I think there is going to be a huge thing in the next couple of years where a lot of people are going to realize that even as like homeowners, even as having a mortgage, that they do have more in common. You know, these are people that own a house that they want to live in, are going to realize that they have more in common with the renters renting to landlords because of their relation to like the bank as being their landlord, sort of thing like that. And it's obviously they are protected a lot by, you know, there's a lot of legislation, especially in New Zealand. There is a lot of stuff that protects the investment in property versus like any other kind of investment and stuff. So they still have a sweet deal in a lot of other ways, more so than your average renter. But I think that there is going to be a moment there where people realize like, oh wait, you know, like we, you know, like as homeowners of one property, we're not utilizing our housing stock as like private property to generate a profit or anything like that. Like we have more in common with these renters than, you know, than we might have previously thought, which I think will be like a good awakening moment for a lot of people.
Like most things, you know, it's there isn't like a black or white answer. Like what I would say to like consider people, like if you have a mortgage and you're struggling, like that's because you're working class. You know, you're part of the working class. Like it's not necessarily like the tenant class. So like you're definitely still like, you know, in terms of like where you are in positions of power for real. Yeah, absolutely. Which is why, you know, I'm trying to talk about like building class consciousness. Like, where are you in relation to this? Right? Where are you in relation to that? And so when it comes to that discussion in particular, yeah, for sure, it's something that I think is going to be definitely varied, like from place to place and person to person, for sure. Right? So building class consciousness, building tenant power. Tenant power is all about like basically growing a tenants movement, growing a tenants union. You know, super important. I think the most important thing to remember when starting a tenants union or joining a tenants union is that like you don't want to be giving your time to like counter-revolutionary power structures that are not actually democratically horizontally organized and like maybe operating as like a charity or an NGO, because of course
is that a common problem with tenant unions?
Not with tenant unions, no, but with lots of unions and particular organizations. Like for example, in the UK we have Shelter, which is a homeless charity, and lots of people go to work for Shelter because they know, oh, we have a homeless problem, and then they go there, they do casework, they realize how hard and soul draining it is even after like getting paid to do it, and then also realizing that actually it's because of the decisions of the people at the top of the charity, who are, by the way, Shelter staff were on strike last well actually this year just gone, you know, because their fucking boss was raking in like 200 grand a year or something.
Didn't we have them on the show?
Yeah, we had Shelter people come on the show. Yeah, to talk about that. Yeah. So you know, super like fucking important to remember that, like, you know, if you're getting involved, like it's not there are very few tenants unions in the UK. They're growing and it's very exciting, but definitely like, yeah, Shelter is like a housing struggle based NGO charity. There are also like Camden Council Tenants Union, which is like when we did the episode on yellow unions, that's like specifically like a council owned, council ran tenants union to hold private landlords to account, but not social landlords. So that's how they kind of get around that, because Camden Council are in charge of the social housing in their area, so they don't want to be held to account. But oh no, we can hold the private landlords to account. Yeah, that's fine. That's okay.
Okay, so you're saying avoid joining or maybe even inadvertently forming one of these types of unions. What are some defining characteristics, like specifically, that people can look for that could differentiate those types? You know, a good kind of tenants union from a bad kind of tenants union.
Is your organization led and run by tenants? Are there landlords on the board? Are there landlords on the committee? Are there landlords on the you know, decision-making sort of like arm of HR or something like that? You know, anything where it's not like a Democrat, like you ideally you want, and you know, I'm biased because it's my union, Greater Manchester Tenants Union, we're horizontally organized, democratically organized, every member has a vote, come to the all-member meeting, do a vote, pass a motion, whatever you want. It's how it works. Same with London Renters Union, and same with CATU, Community Action Tenants Union in Ireland. So, you know, I just think that is like a very important thing to remember, because the housing struggle is so difficult that, you know, as soon as... But landlords are not the type of people who like being challenged. They're just not. As soon as a landlord understands... Yeah, as soon as a landlord understands that there are tenants union actions going on, they're going to try and join that tenants union. They're going to try and influence the decisions that it makes. We at Greater Manchester Tenants Union literally recently had a person who tried to buy like someone's house in the union, and they already owned 2 previous council properties, and they were trying to like get involved with the union and make a bunch of decisions. They were trying to get elected to the committee, and we had to do some fact finding to find out that they actually did own these 2 properties. Anyone who owns more than one property, in as far as we're concerned, is not a fucking tenant by a long shot. So, you know, that's a real thing that can happen, and you don't want that person to be able to like get involved, get elected. You want to be able to, like, when someone's being elected to the committee and you're at the AGM and they say any objections, you go, fucking me, this person owns a bunch of gaffs and they're selling them, they're letting them out, right? So that's something to consider. Anyway, so in terms of like building tenant power, like that's even what we were just talking about then, that's important for tenant power, because you don't want that to be diluted by any kind of landlord empathetic views, or like, you know, I mean, fuck, you might get a tenant who's like slightly empathetic to landlords because they don't understand their class consciousness, but being part of the union, they're gonna get radicalized. I nearly said de-radicalized then, because it is technically more radical to be empathetic to landlords than it is to want housing for all, right? But yeah, you know, building tenant power is like, yeah, we have to, like, you know, make sure that our structures are not the same as the systems that we are trying to challenge, right? Can't be top down, can't be centralized, has to be broad. Greater Manchester Tenants Union, we have like various different branches all over the what would you call it, the boroughs of Greater Manchester. We've got like 10 different branches. They all operate in slightly different ways, and it's that diversity that means that we are like super fucking strong as a union. Like Harperhay Tenants Union have like a lot of different things that they're focusing on. Middleton Tenants Union have a lot of different things that they're focusing on. South Tenants Union, like it all is just like very broad, very, very good, but we're all focused on
it actually
housing.
Reminds me of what we've talked about before about like leftist organizing groups in almost like a paramilitary sense, you know, where it's like you have all these different groups like that kind of like are all handling their own business in their local area or whatever like that, and then being like focused there means that like if it was like one organization that set the tone for everyone, it's kind of like, you know, and this is like a very like, you know, like anarchist and communist way of like kind of handling it anyway, where it's like if you have all these different little groups, whether it's like unions, you know, trade councils, whatever like that, they're focusing on what is important to them and what's relevant to their community around them. And then it's like, obviously, you know, like you all get together and you discuss all these kind of things and stuff. But if you just have one big overarching thing with, you know, like no levels of kind of like breaking it up to a local level or whatever like that, you know, there can be something that's really affecting one community or whatever, but it's totally getting overridden because maybe in like, you know, 3 other groups are like, okay, but this stuff is really important to us, so we as an organization need to, you know, focus on that. So splitting it up like that is like a really effective way of if you literally think about it as like guerrilla warfare against the state.
That's exactly it. It's like every single time the council is coming across, like in Harperhay, they're getting councillors to come to the estates to look at like fly tipping, and it's like, oh yeah, we're actually part of Greater Manchester Tenants Union, and they're going, okay, GMTU, yeah, we know about them. They got us down to Moss Side to look at all the housing. They got us up to Middleton. They're actually dealing with the death of a Waba shark in Rochdale, so they're constantly hearing about us, and that's building power. It's building social profile. So when it comes to building power, that's super important, and we were very, very privileged this week. This was not, I didn't include this in my most base thing of the week because this was sort of like a most base thing that like the whole union, the committee and a bunch of staff like took part in, but we basically met with Southampton Tenants Union, which is a new tenants union that's come up in the UK. There's only, I think, under 50 members or maybe 50 members, and I don't even know if all of them are paying members or whatever, but they're super small compared to us. And they were basically like, they were saying, what do we do? How do we get to your size? How do we grow? What are your best practices? That kind of stuff. So we exchanged numbers, we exchanged information and best tactics and stuff like that. And one of the biggest things that every single person from GMTU was talking about, because they wanted to know how to build power. They were like, look, we need to grow. We need to build power. We need more leverage. We need more people. How do we do that? The biggest thing that we all said was do not underestimate social housing tenants, right? Social housing tenants, basically like welfare tenants. They are already, when we talk about agitation, when I was talking about agitation and training people, I always give people like this example of like, okay, let's say you speak to a middle class renter who's not that invested. They're kind of like liberal left, moderate left. They're not that radicalized, but they've got like a bunch of disrepair. It's not bothering them too much, but like, you know, it's making them uncomfortable. They don't really want to move, but they can if they want to. That is the hardest person to radicalize. You're not going to get a fucking activist out of that person unless they're already ideologically a communist and they've just joined because they know what a tenants union is, right? A social housing tenant could be a raving fucking conspiracy theorist, right? Just absolutely like no, it's all false consciousness, but they know that their fucking house is falling down and it's the problem of the state. They've been banging their head against the brick wall of bureaucracy for fucking years, right? Trying to get shit sorted. They're already agitated. You're not going to have to try hard to go, you know what, bro, I know you said some like weird things about like, you know, the black people in your community, but like I just want to point out to you, yeah, you know that they're on the same housing estate as you. Yeah. They're going through the same shit as you, bro. Like they've not got a good life compared to you. What is it like? You think that like the world is being racist to you? Look, like let's fucking like, you know what I mean? Show you some pictures of their house. Actually, they're members of our union. Oh shit, yeah, you can meet them at the next meetup. Oh right, okay, and they come there, they exchange ideas. This has happened multiple times in our union. One of our strongest.
That rules so hard. I can't even handle it right now.
Right, because the thing is that when people, like, you get, like, some really cringe people on the internet who think that you can debate away fascism, right? You could debate away reactionary ideas. There is nothing more of a waste of time. When you engage someone, like, let's say there was, like, a queerphobic or a transphobic person in the union, and, like, I wanted to reach out to that person with their housing problems as sort of like a queer person, so that I could say to them, do you know what, bro? Like, you might not like it, but I'm queer, but we're the same. We're in the same class. We've got the same issues, and our material conditions are like, you know, it's just like there's hardly any difference. I'm not your enemy, innit? I'm not your enemy. I'm here standing in solidarity with you. It's like Queers for Palestine, right? It's like Jewish Voice for Peace. It's showing that solidarity of being like, we're reaching out, even though you think that we're the bad guys. Actually, no, we support you in it. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. And of course, like, you know, I'm not saying that, like, you know, a trans member of a union should go and speak to a transphobic person. Like, I would do that because I'm cisgender. I'm a man. Do you know what I mean? And I'm white, right? I'm white. So I have that privilege. I have that protection. But anyway, in terms of like social housing tenants, you're going to build that power with people like that. And if you have like a focus on middle class, private, white tenants, you're doing something wrong. You're doing something fucking wrong. You gotta go reach out to people who are like really struggling. And that's super important. So anyway, we've spoken a little bit about tenant power, building tenant power, class consciousness. Once you have tenant power, once you've got a big union, once you've got maybe like, even if it's in your neighborhood, 10 members of like your little WhatsApp group, yeah, that's a little bit of tenant power, yeah. You can resist the violence. We spoke about the violence, yeah. So let's talk about some things. Kira's first thing. When the hypothetical landlord raises the rent, you know, she was going, oh, I'm gonna leave in this, like, you know, pretend scenario that we're doing, and what if now, I don't know if this is the case in Illinois, but definitely if you were in the UK, if you were here doing your best bruv accent, you know, in the UK with us, and you came to Great Manchester Tenants Union, I would say to you, here's the thing, you don't have to pay it. What? I don't have to pay it? What do you mean? Well, there are various parts of legislation that mean that they have to go through certain legal loopholes in order to do that. They can't just like say, I'm raising your rent. What? Has your landlord raised your rent via text message? No, they haven't. They haven't done that. You can say, okay, cool, and then just like not pay them. And then they'll be like, where's my money? And it's like, oh, I thought you were like raising the rent. You've not done that. And they're like, what do you mean? It's like, no, you've not done it. You need to do it. And don't tell them what to do, because what they should do is they should fill out a Section 13 rent raise thing, right? If it's not in your tenancy agreement that they can raise the rent at periods, then they have to fill out a Section 13 rent raise notice, right? And this is a thing that would protect someone from having to pay extortionate rent or move house. Now, how does tenant power help in that regard? Well, landlords don't like the law, right? Even though the law protects them, they don't enjoy it. They don't enjoy engaging with it. They don't enjoy paying tens of thousands of pounds for solicitors to go to court, knowing that they'll probably lose, yeah? So if you were to like negotiate with a tenants union, with your landlord, you could get members from the union to come and sit in a room. You know that picture, that meme that they've got where it's like, you know, how to talk to your boss, and like the crossed out one is just you and your boss, and then the one with the tick is like everyone else with you and just the boss on his own. Like, it's like that. It's exactly like that. You know, you basically like meet up and you say, no, You can't do this. We will make your life a living fucking hell. Not explicitly threat, because you could get yourself in trouble, but like, you know, look, we'll do a social media campaign. We'll act as a union. We'll come and sit in on your letting agent. Do you know what I mean? We'll do all this stuff to, you know, basically stop you from doing this. We'll do everything that we can within our power, and that's it. Yeah? Don't give away your card straight away, because of course they'll be like, I'm gonna report you to the police, and then you've got all that kind of shit to deal with. You want to sit down with them as like landlords. They live in businessman Elon Musk world, so you got to like sit down with them and be like, look, it's in your best interest. It's you need to incentivize. Sorry, you need to be thinking of the profits. If you raise the rent, our member is going to leave, then you've got a void period. Landlords hate void periods where there's no one in their property and they're not collecting rent. Now, you could have the void period, or you could keep this tenant in, still paying rent for another year, sign another year's lease with her, right? This is like a way that you could do this. Social media campaigns. So let's say, for example, your landlord is, or letting agent that's acting on behalf of the landlord has got high public profile. Let's say in the UK, they're like Reed's Reigns. They got signs everywhere. You know, use tenant power to build a social media platform, raise the social media profile of the tenants union, do a massive campaign, basically talking about all the things like, a company like Reed's Reigns is going to have shit on the website saying like, we aim to deliver the best for tenants, it's clean houses and all that. And if you've got stuff that directly contradicts that, you've got them. That's social leverage, you know, and then you can get people from fucking all over the world. This has happened, like literally, like FD Signifier, friend of the show, Feek, was literally retweeting a tenants union thing about like a woman in Oldham who's a member of the union who had like no gas for a week. Like, you can like internationalize this shit if you get on social media. So the power that you have in that regard is incredible. You could do things like phone banking, where basically like you get a bunch of people together, phone the office, like, you know, literally organize people to ring. Right, okay, Tim, you're going to ring from 10 a.m. till 5 p.m. Kira, you're going to ring from 5 p.m. till, 7 p.m. Mule, you're going to ring from 7 p.m. till 10 p.m. Don't let them get off the phone. Always be talking about it, like just completely ruin the day. Don't let them be able to do the work where they are like literally like making people's lives hell. Because then what's going to happen while they're like stuck on the phones all day? More and more tenants are going to come into the office and say, why aren't you answering the phones? And then it's a fucking nightmare, right? So stuff like that. Now, the stuff that I've spoken about just like now is like, collective protest, some like direct action-y stuff. On top of that, you could basically like, start a campaign. So what you were talking about, Kira, the Seattle air conditioning thing, if you built up a tenants union and there was no like direct way to sort of like get a win for tenants in your area that need AC, like you got elderly people in the union, you got young disabled people in the union, start a campaign, right? Depending on how much power you've got, depending on how much time and energy and capacity people in the union have, start a campaign, start it on social media, a little bit of graphics. You got someone in your union like Tim, elect him as comms officer. He's doing all the communications, he's doing the social media, he's doing the graphics, right? And shit like that. You have to be creative and sort of like think of, right, who's going to be the best here? In Aotearoa, you could have like a campaign about black mold, do you know what I mean? And how that like affects people. That's something that we're doing in Greater Manchester Tenants Union at the moment. Eviction resistances, I've spoken about those, on the show before. This is like something that you're going to have to like look at yourself in whatever country you live in, because it's going to be super hard in the US because the cops just turn up, they have guns, that's no fun. In the UK, it's a bit different because bailiffs, this is literally a thing that happened when I was on an eviction resistance a couple of weeks ago. A bailiff waved at a police van and they just drove on by. And it was really fucking funny seeing him realize actually where he sits.
It's like, finally, the cavalry have arrived. And it's like...
It was fucking great. And I was there saying to him, look, bro, these, who do you think these people serve? Like, it's not you. Do you know what I mean? Like, here's the thing, like, we're not going anywhere until you do, and that's the end of it. So, on top of that, You got all these different things. Eviction resistances, it's going to be varied in wherever you live. So, don't take my word on it. Don't just do it. Sort of have a look. And the next thing I'm going to talk about is the law. You got to look at the law, use the law as a tool, right? So like I was saying before, if someone has a rent rise, well, if the law's on your side, you can use that in your demands letter, right? That you have a fucking, let's say that you got the Tim who's done the comms. Tim's whacked up a cool ass, I don't know, Colorado Tenants Union or something like that. And you put that on the head of a Google Doc. At the bottom, you got the little logo, you got the website, all that shit. Boom, it looks official. Yeah, that's all you need. Whip up little demand letter, 3 pages, no bigger than that. Quote the law, right? So when you're talking about all the things that have been done wrong in the property, you've not adhered to this section of legislation. This is basically to try and put the shits up the landlord, essentially. Do you know what I mean? You want to be basically either scaring them through fear of the people who are above them in the ruling class, to sort of if they're like a small landlord, corporate landlords, it's much harder, but slumlords and other people are going to respond to this a bit better. So quote the law like that, but always remember, the law is not in the favor of tenants. It simply isn't. I don't even know one country where this is the case. Maybe Cuba, maybe Vietnam, I don't know. Where housing is a human right and stuff like that, but honestly, the law is not there to protect you. So you could have collective protest, direct actions, eviction resistances, social media, and then on top of that, thinking about collective actions, you could do a collective rent strike. Rent strikes are very, very, very effective. If you do a little tiny bit of maths, I hate maths, right? But if you are in a house of 7 people and each of those 7 people are paying £700 a month, 7 times 7 is 47, 49, 42. I don't know. What is it?
49.
49, right. It's 49. So it's £4,900 per month that landlord is bringing in, right? So think about how much money, what do they do? Does your landlord rent Lamborghinis on the weekend, tuxedos, go to high-class restaurants, spend a lot of money?
It's such a cute idea of what rich people do.
No, but this is a thing. This is a thing.
Are they wearing tuxedos and driving Lamborghinis?
No, but you know what I mean? These are all expensive things that
No, they are. It's just very cute. Anyways, go on.
Just trying to make it easy for people to understand.
I get it.
You know what I mean? Are they doing things that cost them a lot of money? Do they have a massive house where they're probably paying a massive mortgage on it and they're using your rent to pay the mortgage? Well, if you did a rent strike for a couple of days, you better believe that landlord's going to cave to your demands because, listen, if they're not providing the things that are listed in the tenancy agreement, you might have a case if it ever does go to court in actually proving that you did not need to pay the rent. Let's say, for example, you have a bit of legislation, you're lucky enough to be in the UK, you got the housing health and safety rating system, that stuff about being too cold. I'm not going to say it's definitely going to work in a court of law, and I would never rely upon that, but I would say the courts would probably say, yeah, you weren't fulfilling your duties as a landlord, and that's a fact. Now, again, this is just sort of speaking from a position of we've not done any rent strikes with the Great Manchester Tenants Union, yeah, so we actually don't know what the legal stuff would be around that yet. We don't quite have the power to do that, and we have 300 to 400 members, and more other non-paying members who do stuff with us, so we're quite a big union, so I wouldn't say, yeah, definitely do a rent strike tomorrow, it's a great idea. Just sort of think about the ramifications, have a look at the law, make sure you're doing it and you're protected if you do that. But there is some other stuff. So I mentioned squatters before as part of the tenant class. You could basically use squatting as homeless shelters. So we had in the UK the autonomous winter shelter, and then if you get collective purchase of squats to form housing co-ops basically effectively destroy landlords. It's where a bunch of people pay the mortgage themselves essentially, and then you know, they will basically like, you know, vote to bring someone else in if there's room in the property to have like more tenants. Like, oh, okay, yeah, let's bring this person in. And then on top of that, if you have like a collective of different housing co-ops, that's kind of how we like seize private property away from the ruling class, essentially. I wanted to like bring up the example of the ZAD here today, because the ZAD, the Zona de Fondre, the one that we're doing the documentary about, is basically like the rural version of this, where they basically squatted a bunch of land, and now it's just like, yeah, it's ours. Like, we live here. This is the end of it. Do you know what I mean? It's like, that's it. Yeah, that's sort of like something to think about in terms of rural organizing. Excuse me. How landlords serve capital and vice versa. I don't think I need to get this bit. I know that we're getting on for time. I don't think I need to like stress that too much, because this is just sort of like very you know, basic stuff. Landlords and corporate and lower push their luck via market value and legislation. I've already talked about that. You know, government corruption and landlords. So like, you know, a lot of MPs might be landlords. They can use their power as MPs to like vote for stuff that would be in their best interest, despite what their constituents want. You know, basically just like unchecked landlordism will, like, in the same way that like unchecked capitalism will result in revolution, you know, so will unchecked landlordism. Like, you know, the PRC and the USSR were basically, you know, all about land ownership. You know, there were like so many peasant farmers who just like did not own the land, and these like basically feudal lords were like controlling the various like areas and stuff. And a lot of those feudal lords, like, kind of like lower sort of landlords that were like, I don't know how you would call it, but they were called kulaks in the USSR, and they would like basically like make it really fucking difficult, and that was like, I think that's like how the Holodomor happened or whatever.
Yeah, it's like a whole thing. Like kulaks, a lot of kulaks. So they were like the people that refused to like kind of like relinquish their kind of you know, like their control over their land and farms and all this kind of stuff like that. But yeah, it's like there was like this kind of like this middle manager kind of tyrant level where it's like they weren't like, well, you know, and it is like, it was like feudalism, you know, this idea where it's like there's like the king or queen or whatever like that, and underneath that there's like these different tiers of like, there's like a dude that rules over a bunch of areas or whatever, and then there's like these little kind of what is essentially like barons and things like that. But and it was still like the titles had changed, and like, you know, the exchange, like the currency and stuff like that had changed, but it was like essentially these same social positions still, you know, where it's like most people were just kind of peasants, like, you know, kind of paying barons for the right to work their land and, you know, all this kind of shit like that. So it was like, yeah, it was a pretty dark situation, but still very, very similar to the landlord dynamic. Like it basically was the same thing, you know?
Yes. So, yeah, just bringing the whole thing to a close, as I promised at the start of the segment. Yeah, a national rent strike could end landlordism easily within a month. Now, what am I talking about? National rent strike. Most people agree. What is it, co-hosts? If there's like a general strike, it would only need to be how much of a percentage of the workers? It would need to be like, I think it's like 50% of workers, or maybe even less. I don't know. Like, it doesn't need to be like massive for like a potential like revolutionary general strike. I think like Tim and Kira are both frantically Googling.
I'm trying to figure it out, but I just off the top of my head, I don't know, but I'm
Here's
trying
the
to
thing.
figure it out.
Yeah, it seems like it is a general term, you know, like it doesn't, I don't think it requires a set percentage or anything like that, but you can see how there's like, you know, there's like, I'm just looking at it now, and there's general strikes that were literally like, you know, like 1 million people or something like that, which is just like, I mean, when you think about like the effect that 1 million people could have on like infrastructure and all that kind of stuff, that's heaps, you know?
Massive.
So yeah. So I mean, like, I don't think it has to be like as huge as like.
It doesn't have to be everybody.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Everybody. Yeah. So like in that same regard, like it wouldn't need to be every renter who could achieve massive change. But let's say in the UK, for example, London Renters Union, I don't know how many members they got. I think they might have something like 5,000 members or something. They're an extremely amazing, powerful organization that they're really fucking good. But let's say, you know, they grow to be even more powerful. Let's say GMTU grows to be even more powerful. Let's say that we get a tenants union in Birmingham. Let's say we get one in Cardiff. Let's say we get one in you know, Catu gets bigger. Let's say we get them in Newcastle, like all over the UK, and all of a sudden we've got the numbers to like withhold more than, I don't know, the numbers escape me, but like, you know, millions of pounds in rent, right? If we all did a rent strike and we do a national collective rent strike until they change the law in order to make people, in order to make housing you know, a human right, right? So in terms of like ending landlordism, maybe not particularly ending landlordism. If we had more people than that, I'm sure that we could end landlordism because they would go broke within like 2 fucking minutes. Do you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden, people would go, hang on a minute, we could just like never pay rent. Like if we don't pay rent like now, and like they can't arrest all of us, maybe we just like don't ever pay rent again and we just stay in our houses and everyone has a house. You know, it's about changing people's minds, broadening people's perceptions. If everybody did a rent strike, if there was a nationwide rent strike, it would make people start to understand that class consciousness would then start to burn away. The tinders would be lit in people's minds about like, where am I in this struggle? Is that me? Should I take part in this? You know, and then all of a sudden they do, and you can see this with like various different movements, you know, all over the world. Palestine's a huge one. Do you know what I mean? People all over the world are saying like, should I get involved in this struggle? Actually, I should, because like the amount of power that the protests and the demonstrations have made people realize, oh, actually, this is what it's about. This is what's going on, and this is how, you know, we really change public consciousness. So I've waffled, but there have been a bunch of rent strikes that were extremely powerful. Glasgow, back in the day in like 1920 or something like that. The Leeds rent strike in 1914, a bit closer to home for me. Kirkby, which is like, I think that's Yorkshire. The Highland Land League, I think that was like a bunch of people who wanted to like get together and retake the Highlands as common ground in Scotland. Back in the day, the Barcelona mass rent strike in 1931, the Gothenburg rent strikes in the 1930s, Northern Ireland, University College London, and then there were contemporary rent strikes that have been extremely effective. We spoke to someone who was doing a contemporary rent strike at the University of Manchester. We have an episode about that. Please go check that out.
That was really good.
Yeah, and also University College London again. And at the moment, this is amazing news, if people haven't heard about this already. Nearly 500 tenants from 5 apartment buildings in Toronto are on rent strike. They have been for some time. This is like things that are happening now. Multiple buildings like this in New York City, Brooklyn, and various other places. In Queens, there was an apartment building in Queens, I think, where like the tenants all got together to do a rent strike. And then eventually like the landlord said, this is too much trouble than it is. I'm just going to sell you the building, and then everybody in the property like now owns their apartment outright. You know, and this is how effective these are. Small scale rent strikes that are having tangible effects on their landlords, right? So important. So please organize. If you don't have a tenants union in your area like the ones that I've described, get together, have with the people in your apartment. Just print out a little QR code. Are you a renter in this building? Scan this QR code and join the WhatsApp group chat. Plaster that all over the walls. Get some people in a WhatsApp group. Start to have meetings. Talk about it. You know, get a bit of food together. Make a party about it. Emma Goldman and all that. If I can't dance, it's not my revolution. Make it sexy. Don't make it like, you know, boring or whatever. And that's that. We should probably get to questions. Because
Mule talking about orgies again. Can't stop.
I know, all right. Sexy parties, like
sexy Mule and his sexy orgies.
I don't fraternize with those that I organize. So you know that's
good policy.
Yeah, it's a good policy, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But orgies are good, and as I said, I am having one right now. So this is weird because like I have access to the questions, so I'll just read them and answer them. I don't know.
Sure. I can pretend that you don't. You know what, Mule? I'm going to ask you the question. Actually.
Okay. All right.
Okay. All right. So the first question is, it's like a twofer question because it's two chatters. B-Rat asks, any specific advice if there's no current tenants union around and the landlords are generally the smaller kind, like renting out to only 1 or 2 properties at most? And Jenny also wants to know what to do if your community is right wing and you're, say, queer. I thought those two went together because, yeah.
Similar thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like I just said, B-Rat, like, you want to be speaking to your neighbors. You want to be like, with organizing from the very, very start, you got to get like a bit creative. You got to figure out like, how can I get to know my neighbors in a way that is like, well, in part to like Jenny's part of the question, is safe for me. And, in a way that doesn't like betray my position to my landlord or our landlord or whatever. So you gotta figure out what's the best way. Do you have a community center where you all meet? Is there like a pub or a tavern, or like a shisha place, or like something where like everybody goes, a coffee shop in the neighborhood where like everybody knows each other? Maybe get that little flyer. Is your landlord being a piece of shit? Put that WhatsApp QR code on there. Join the WhatsApp group chat. Talk to us. Let's have a meeting. As soon as you get, like, I wouldn't even wait too long. As soon as you get 5 people, organize a meeting. Do the first meeting, right? Because then you can talk about the meeting, then you can advertise the meetings as a regular thing. When we're going to meet everyone, okay, once a month. Where we're going to meet here. Okay, brilliant. That's our meeting. Then it's established, right? Then you got to start thinking about a constitution, but that's another step. So, yeah. In terms of, like, if your community is right-wing and you're queer, it's like I said before. You can only organize with those that you feel safe with, right? If you want to try and extend that solidarity, like you gotta like. This is why I will always push the more privileged to do this work, because like you have to use your you have to use your privilege to help those that are not privileged get out of these situations. If I can like go to landlords or like other people in the area that are tenants and like say, yeah, look, this is what's happening and this is what's going on, and like this person shouldn't be treating like this, like I should be doing that. Like people with privilege, if you're cisgender, stand up for your transgender friends. If you're white, stand up for your racialized friends, etc. So if you're a man, stand up for your women friends. It's just that this is what you've got to do. It frustrates me to no end that like cis white men are constantly wanting to be the hero, but they will never do a thing like this, so that's that really. So yeah, what's the next one? Does anyone want to read me the next one? I'm not reading it on purpose.
Mig598 has asked, would it always be easy to tell if there are landlords involved in a union? Would they need to declare that?
This is like the constitution stage of having a union, right? If your union has a constitution, read it. If there are no sections that describe, sort of like where the power is sort of not centralized, but like say if you have a committee, most unions are run by a committee. Ideally, you don't want anyone like on that committee to be a landlord. They should have to declare that at that point. You could join the union in solidarity if you are like, if you own a property, for example. But if you rent that property out, it should be stated in your constitution that like, as soon as anyone gets wind of that, you're out, right? You're not a fucking tenant. You're not part of the tenant class. You have no place organizing with us. It's a conflict of interest. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. It's easy to tell in the same way that it's easy to tell if cops are in your movement. So by proxy, not that easy. But if you are clued up, if you know what's going on, if you start to hear people sort of saying like, maybe we should change this stuff in the constitution about like landlords not being allowed on the committee, that's probably a fucking landlord. What point would a tenant have in, wanting to pass that motion kind of thing? Do you know what I mean? Basically use your analysis, use your real-time analysis, rely on your comrades as well. Your comrades, it's up to it. You know, this is what a union is about. It's about comrades. It should never just be on you to, you know, figure out exactly what's going on all the time in your union. I say this to my MSO team all the time. I say, look, it's not about me. I'm not your manager in it. Do you know what I mean? I'm just like your committee representative. I'm helping you get trained, but that's because I know what's going on. It's up to you to like ask us questions, and we're not going to be like, you keep asking me this question, you kicked out, blah, blah, blah. Comrades is like, we're all constantly learning together. There is no hierarchy. You know, that's what it's about, right? That's what it's about. So short answer, no, there's no easy way to tell. If you have your suspicions, you might be able to like use the land registry. For example, in the UK, we have a thing called the land registry where you pay like £3 to find out who owns a property. And then if someone owns a property, that's one thing. Do they own another property? Well, you'll have to find out, you know, do they rent that out, etc., etc. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So what's the next one? Alex all over the place asks, question, what would be some good resources for how people can find out the tenant rights in their locality? For instance, my city has rules about how much time you need before a rent increase, but the county and state doesn't. I wouldn't have known this unless I had directly researched each locality's laws. This is like, sounds very US specific, right?
Yeah, that sounds like US.
Maybe Kira might also have some insight on this. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have no idea. Don't know.
Yeah.
I know I am the resident American. I should probably be a better representative, but I do not know.
But this is it. So, you know, Conrad's in the chat as well. He's saying you literally have to check your government at every level. Look, this is again, like I will always point out the fact that there are various tenants unions in the US. Like, they do exist. Like, I know for a fact that there's one in Kansas City. I know for a fact that there are multiple in New York City. I know that there are loads in LA. I know that there are loads in San Francisco. I say loads, like there's going to be one or two. But like, you know, you're going to have to like find out where these are. And you can find them on places like Twitter. Twitter's a great place to do it. If you just search like tenants or tenants union or tenants association, you'll find like a fucking load of different like tenants unions, tenants associations. So make sure you check your local area to see if there are any there. Otherwise, it's going to be on you, and this is one of the difficult parts of forming a union, which is why you got to like get a bunch of comrades first, so you can all sit down, you know, have a nice takeaway, or like have a nice like I don't know, what do Americans have instead of like a stew? Like make like a stew or a curry for everybody, you know, and sit down and do some legal research and find out.
Americans make a turducken.
Yeah, turducken, innit? Have a potluck. Yeah, there you go. Amy C3, Amy C3. If you're on Twitch, Amy C3 is amazing. Like we've had her on the show.
We also had her on as our guest early in Red Planet's lore.
We did. So she's got some incredibly good housing resources. If you're in the UK, join Great Manchester Tenants Union, join London Renters Union. If you're outside of those like catchment areas, there is like lots of very easy to access legislation in the UK. You can literally just Google it. Shelter has a lot of resources. Citizens Advice Bureau. If there are any like organizations like that in the US, they're probably good for that stuff too. Like, like Citizens Advice is like an NGO that basically just like knows people's legal rights regarding like a lot of stuff. That would be my answer for that. Sorry, it's not perfect. Nothing is.
So true.
Okay, so we got one more. Also from Meg598. Question from you. Could you talk a bit about mitigating the risk to tenants when they resist violence from their landlords? I've seen many of my friends be scared to argue with their landlords for fear of being evicted, or worse, not being able to find anywhere new to rent from if a potential future landlord was to find out that they resisted, e.g. via a social media campaign or a bad reference. Are there any ways that tenants unions can protect from this kind of retaliation? Thanks.
Yes. That's a fantastic question, Meg, and I really appreciate it, because this is one of the most important things that I taught to when I'm training people to do member solidarity. It's something I've had to learn. It's something that I've had to like, really sort of sit back and go, okay, about like it's called safeguarding, right? It's called safeguarding, and it's safeguarding not in like, some people might do safeguarding as part of a maybe you work with disabled people, maybe you're like a healthcare professional, something like this. We do safeguarding in like from a tenant point of view. So if someone is at risk of being evicted, we make sure that they know that risk. When we get people to do actions, we're not like forcing them to do it as well. I think that's also key. Number one, because that's bad practice. Number two, because you could put them in harm's way as a result of like, bad safeguarding, assessments, but also because that doesn't actually empower anybody, right? So we don't take like a member's case, as it were. We don't even call it a case, we call it a dispute. If we don't take a case away from a member and like work on it without their knowledge, we keep them informed at every single point, at every single step of the way. And we basically get them to lead on it. It's like, okay, here's what we would do. Here's the resources we can offer you as a union. Here's what we know works. We've done this before and it's worked really well. We would advise that you do this, but ultimately it's up to you. How much compensation you want to ask for? That's up to you. Do you want to wait until you're in a safe place before you do this? That's up to you. We get a lot of people who say they would feel more comfortable to wait until they're in a safe place to do their dispute. Do you know what I mean? And that is like a lot of the time what happens. We've had like situations in the past where, like I said, I've said earlier, like landlords have been sexually harassing to women tenants. I've had tenants literally been beaten up by landlords. We have to say to people like that is like the only time when we say to people, we can't get involved with any of this. We can't do any collective action because it could result in you getting hurt more, right? And you have to we don't have community justice, right? Yet. We don't have community justice. We haven't got rid of cops, all this kind of stuff. So, sometimes it's bigger than what you're doing as a tenants union. And sometimes like the gain in power for the union and the help that you could provide that member might be like completely overshadowed by the fact that they may get like hurt or killed or harassed or something like that. Then you've got that on your fucking conscience for life. Despite the fact that you shouldn't do it at all. It's gonna fuck with you. Then your fucking position as an activist is like, rightfully called into question, and you got to step back. You got to get out of it. So yeah, absolutely. Like you can't like in terms of like the bad reference one is a really annoying one. I do just want to point out on that in the UK. There's absolutely no legislation requiring a reference from a landlord, by the way. They can't ask for that by law. They can ask for it, but you can refuse to give it to them. Obviously, this does put you in a bit of a position, but there's literally... I would never say do this because this is against the law and illegal, and I would never tell anyone to break the law. It's a bad thing to do. The law is the arbiter of all morality, and you might get done for fraud, but there's literally nothing stopping like a random person from writing a reference. Your mum could do it. Your mum could be like, yes, this person was my tenant for 18 years and they were very well behaved, never did anything wrong. There was that one time when I found porn in his cabinet, but that was, boys will be boys.
Yeah. But it was all legal, none of the weird stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, that's that. But yeah, thank you so much for all the questions. Really appreciate it,
Well, I think this was extremely informative. I'm like really pumped.
Yeah.
Like I can feel your passion for this. Like it feels very like I'm like inspired, very inspired by this. So thank you, Mule, for guiding us through all that knowledge and making it really fun and really interactive And I think you did a really, really great job. I'm going
I've
to speak
tried.
for everyone. I'm speaking for everyone right now. I'm doing it.
Yeah. No, I think, and from seeing what people are saying in the chat, it seems like we've had a couple people in there that could really relate to some of the situations that you've mentioned. So yeah, hopefully that helps them out.
Thanks so much, peeps.
So that is that's the bulk of the show for this week. Do we have any homework though?
Yeah. I would say that everyone's homework for this show should be to go out and find out what their rights are as tenants.
Yeah.
Like, even if it means like digging through a bunch of stuff, like looking at legislation and this, that, and the other, and trying to find out what legal speak people are using to obfuscate the law and shit like that. Give it a go. If you already know that, then my homework will be the same as like the last time we had tenant stuff on here, which would be like, either start or join a tenants union.
Yeah, cool. Right, and even like a tenants union will absolutely be able to help you to find that information as well. Which I think would be great, especially if you live in one of these areas, like that question that we got about finding out about what is the law in your locality, and how like Conrad mentioned that you kind of have to check in at every level in America. It's like, what's the state, what's the county, what's the locality, all that kind of stuff, which can, it sounds like a pretty daunting task. But a tenants union would absolutely be able to help you out with that. So thanks for all of that, Mule, all of the good info there.
My pleasure.
So if you enjoyed the stream, if you think you've learned something from it, then it would be great if you could jump over to patreon.com/red_planet. And if you think that anything that we've talked about has helped you out, and you can afford to, you can sign up there for our Patreon. We've got a bunch of different tiers to support the show. That all goes into funding everything from like paying our producer to, we're going to start soon with an editor. We're going to putting together, like Mule's been editing together a bunch of footage that him and Sophie took over in France. We're going to make like the first Red Planet proper documentary and stuff. So all the Patreon is kind of what supports all of that and helps us put together the show, and also work on the show outside of the time that we're actually doing the stream. So head on over there if you want to help support. We've got a bunch of different tiers. I'll start with the first one. First one is Sprite mode. So that's $3.50 in New Zealand dollars per month, or $2 American, and I'm guessing about £2. Is that right?
Yeah, you got it.
About. And so get started with your support for Red Planet by becoming a Sprite. The benefits include the sacred and forbidden knowledge that you are helping the Red Planet team, early access to VODs, and access to the Red Planet Discord. So we've got a Discord set up that this tier, Sprite mode, will get you into the Discord, where you can hang out, chat, and all this kind of stuff. Being at subscribing at higher tiers will get you further access to other stuff in the Discord, which I think if someone else can explain that, if someone want to tell us a little bit about the next tier up, Goblin mode.
I'll do it. The next tier up is in fact Goblin mode for $10 a month, or £8.50, I think.
Yes.
And or something, Tim. I don't know, some amount.
It is $17.50.
$17.50 in New Zealand. Everyone loves a goblin. We all get a little goblin mode from time to time. Complete your gobology by going goblin mode with everything from Sprite mode, a cool pack of Red Planet stickers for you to stick in legal places and only in places like that, and access to the exclusive Red Planet Discord hangouts, which are little hangouts we do where we are hanging out in the Discord, and we like watch something like a show or a movie, and then the hosts have discussions, and it's very, very fun. But what if I want to go even harder than that, Mule? What could I do?
Well, as you know, I'm always having orgies, so I love it when people go harder. It's beast mode! That's right, it's £17 a month. If you're in the UK, Kara, what's that in dollars? $20?
$20.
$20,
Yeah.
what's that in...
It's $34.50 in New Zealand.
$34.50 New Zealand dollars. Holy shit, you actually gonna go beast mode? Well, then we can offer you all the stuff from the lower tiers and pin badges. Yeah, pin badges. Wear your excellent new Red Planet pin badge literally everywhere. It's completely cool and good to do. But listen, Tim, you know, there's just like, you know, we spoke a lot about like social class earlier today, and there's a type of social class that I want to talk about, and you know, they need a lot of help from us, and they're called what are they called, Tim? What are they?
Sickos.
Tell us about sickos.
The sickest of the sick. Like, you know, like all of us Red Planet hosts.
Would you call them perverts?
Yeah, perverts, deviants, degenerates, all of the above. The kind of people that hang out at Mule's house.
Yeah.
So Sicko Mode is $100 American a month, 172 New Zealand dollars a month. I'm gonna say like what, like, is it like £90?
Oh, you're close. You're so close. It's 85.
Yeah, £85 a month. Which, if you support us this much, we can only really reasonably offer you all the stuff from the lower tiers, plus a very special thank you message at the end of every stream, which sounds like this. Thank you to our sickos JBP, Narrowland Starfire, Queen Pib, Cassie Tastrophe, and Risk Inverse. They're our sickos, the sickest of the sick. They keep the lights on at Red Planet HQ. And yeah, sickos basically, you know, like they pay for the bulk of all of our stuff for Red Planet. So even just like a single sicko makes like so much of a difference to like, you know, like the amount of stuff we get. So huge thanks to all of them. Like, thanks to everyone that supports us via Patreon, but like, you know, like really huge shout out to the sickos. Yeah. And so that's the end of our Patreon. We'll and we have merch available. So some of you have seen, here we go, we got the picture already. That's our first t-shirt there. We're gonna have more in the future, but yeah, you can check out our merch at Mercenary Creative. It's the web store run by Conrad, our show producer. Yeah, there's a bunch of other stuff there as well, but that's where all our t-shirts and stickers and everything come from as well. So check out Mercenary Creative if you want to grab a cool shirt and support Red Planet. So, but if that's not quite enough and you need more from all of the individual Red Planet hosts in general, where can more Kira fans find a little bit more Kira content?
It's a great question. Thanks, Tim. They can find more Kira content everywhere under Kira Chat. So my twitch.tv/Kira Chats. My Blue Sky is kirachats.bsky.social. Yeah. My Discord is discord.gg/Kira Chats. Find me anywhere. I stream 5 days a week, so I'll be streaming tomorrow. And yeah, I still haven't been able to like iron out the kinks in my pitch. I've been doing this for years now, and I always figure it out newly every single time. I don't know about the rest of you, but Mule, let's hear how good your pitch is. Where can I find you?
Oh, well, Kira, I've definitely got kinks in my pitch. You can find me at linktree.ee/DJMUEL. That's right. It's all on there. You could get me on Twitch. You could get me on TikTok. You could get me on Blue Sky. You could get me on Twitter. All those places. I'm on YouTube. Yeah, I've done a couple of streams last month, but yeah, like I've got to do this Zad documentary, so I'm taking another couple of weeks off to do that. And then after that, I'll be back on Twitch. And then in the new year, you could expect a new video from me on my YouTube channel. You could also check out all my other older YouTube videos, which are all very good. They're perfect. There's nothing wrong with any of them. And if you tell me what you think is wrong with them, you'll get banned and deleted from my channel, because that's who I am and how I operate. On top of all that, you can go to my Patreon and get some exclusive content that's also quite good. It's not as good as the other stuff, but it's pretty good and it's all right. And you can get extra stuff if you want more of that. What about Tim?
Well, for the real Timians out there, you can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky as Dread Conquest. Not that I spend a lot of time on Blue Sky. I should, maybe, I don't know. And over on Twitch and YouTube as Conquest of Dread. Yeah, haven't been streaming too much outside of the Red Planet streams, but maybe we'll get into it a little bit more over the holidays. I've got like a list of games that I have that I would love to play on stream. But for our fourth host, who is currently not with us, Sophie from Mars, you can find all kinds of amazing Sophie from Mars related content on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Blue Sky, and most importantly, Patreon, by looking up Sophie from Mars, or you could just go to linktree.ee/Sophie from Mars. All of her stuff is there, super easy to find. And we will see you again next week. All right, cool.
Bye.
Bye.
That's what I do in my orgies.